Chapter 1349. In the Sunrise Divine Palace, Ningchen used his ability for the first time after Tianqi's awakening. It seemed like an ordinary ability, but it was normal in the God realm. It was far from the shocking power he had during Tianqi's awakening. The moon goddess frowned. She didn't understand. Ningchen waved his hand to disperse the cold air. He said, "Moon goddess, there's something I've always been curious about. I hope you can tell me the truth." "Speak your mind," Moon God replied, stopping her thoughts. "Did Yanqin Prince come to the God realm after he woke up?" Ningchen asked softly. "Yes." The moon goddess nodded. "He did come, but he left very quickly. I don't know where he is now. You know that the God realm is only one of the 9 heavens. He only exists for the way of the sword. Maybe he left the God realm a long time ago and went to the other heavens." Ningchen looked up at the sky. He had been chasing after his senior all his life. Unfortunately, he was getting further and further away from him. The legendary swordsman of the mortal world. His sword is unfathomable. Even someone as proud as my brother can't stop praising him. High Priest, if you're willing to let go, you won't lose to anyone in the future. The moon goddess said softly. Ningchen withdrew his gaze and smiled. "I'm not senior, so I'll never be as carefree as senior. Everyone has their own path, and my path is to do my best to protect those who I think are worth protecting." The moon goddess sighed. "Don't worry. You still have a long way to go. Time is the last thing a cultivator needs. When you get rid of all the worries in your heart and truly embark on the path of cultivation, you'll realize that although the scenery in front of you is different, it's still very beautiful." "I hope so," Ningchen replied with a smile. He also hoped that such a day would come. "High Priest, what do you plan to do in the future?" The moon goddess asked softly. "I'll leave the divine palace and travel around. When my cultivation recovers, I'll try my best to break through to the monarch realm." Ningchen replied. The moon goddess nodded. The laws of the God realm are different from those of the mortal world. It's relatively easy to break through to the monarch realm. For the high priest, as long as your cultivation recovers, it won't be too difficult to break through to the emperor realm. At this point, the moon goddess looked at the man beside her and said softly, "The high priest's strength has long surpassed that of ordinary emperors. However, the high priest should know that becoming an emperor paragon isn't the end of cultivation." "Yes." Ningchen nodded. He looked into the distance and said softly, "When I was young, my first dream was to become one of those innate masters who could go anywhere. Later on, the Lord of the Underworld descended and destroyed all my knowledge with his destructive power. Only then did I realize that there was more than just the innate masters in the world. There was also the treading celestials. Above the treading celestials, there was an even more powerful 4th realm. The higher I stood, the more I realized that there was a higher peak in this world." The moon goddess was silent. After a moment, she said, "The higher you stand, the further you can see. If you don't reach the corresponding height, there are some things you will never be able to touch. The path of cultivation is endless. Even the high and mighty master of the 7 extinction celestial realm never said that the place he stood at was the peak of the world. Perhaps this is the most attractive part of the martial arts path. The endless path of cultivation. Where is the end? The unknown world always makes people yearn for it," Ningchen said calmly. "High Priest, when you reach the peak of the imperial path, return to the divine palace," the moon goddess said. "Why?" Ningchen asked. "The divine transformation realm," the moon goddess said seriously. "Originally, the high priest could accept the baptism of divine power now. However, I suggest that the high priest should enter the divine transformation realm when he is at the peak of the imperial path. That way, the high priest's path of cultivation won't be affected. I have heard that in ancient times, human cultivators could ascend to the celestial realm when they were at the 4th realm. After being baptized in the deification pool, they shed their mortal bodies. Although their cultivation didn't change, their strength increased greatly. I think the divine transformation realm is very similar to that," Ningchen said. "Yes," the moon goddess said. "The imperial path realm is the limit of the martial arts path. It is also the end of the 4th realm. If you want to break through to a higher realm, the aura in your body must transform into a higher level of power. The deification pool of the 4 great celestial realms and the baptism of divine power in the God realm have the same effect. Immortal Yuan and divine Yuan are closer to the origin of heaven and earth. Therefore, if the high priest wants to become stronger, he must go through this step. I understand. Ningchen nodded. If there is a day when I reach the divine transformation realm, I will definitely come back and disturb you. The moon goddess thought for a moment, then flipped her right hand. A jade slip appeared and flew into Ningchen's hand. This is a map of the God realm. There are also some simple introductions to some forces. Take a look at it carefully to avoid unnecessary trouble, the moon goddess said. Thank you, moon goddess. Ningchen's divine sense scanned the jade slip. He only skimmed through it once, but he deeply felt the vastness and magnificence of the God realm. How many years would it take to travel through such a vast territory of the God realm? High priest, I know you have your own things to do. I won't keep you. However, the road ahead is difficult. You must be careful. If you run into trouble that you can't solve, remember to go back to the divine palace and ask for help, the moon goddess said seriously. I will remember your kindness, moon goddess, Ningchen said calmly. He looked at the land of the God realm in front of him. Beams of light flashed across his eyes. What kind of different scenery would there be in the God realm? Moon goddess, we will meet again someday. As he spoke, Ningchen flew out and rushed forward. We will meet again someday. Behind him, the moon goddess looked at the back of Ningchen and said softly. The world of the human world was too small. It had begun to limit the growth of the high priest. In this vast and boundless God realm, she wanted to see how the famous Marquis could amaze the world. In front of the central temple, the rising sun god stepped out. He looked into the distance. His golden eyes were calm. He was looking forward to seeing how far the human who was valued by the moon goddess could go. Would he fade into the crowd or amaze the world? He hoped that his expectations would not be meaningless. After watching for a moment, the rising sun god turned and disappeared into the temple. Just as Jiming entered the God realm, in the west of the God realm, the golden-winged rock returned and reported to the Buddha. Has the pill been delivered? Buddha Shilai asked in the dazzling light of Buddha. Yes, Buddha, the golden-winged rock replied. Buddha Shilai nodded and said, You can go back and rest. The golden-winged rock accepted the order and immediately got up and left. Not long after the golden-winged rock left, a woman dressed in bodhisattva clothes said respectfully, Since Buddha knows that the golden-winged rock took the 9 transformation heaven reversal pill, why didn't you punish him? Everything in the world has a cause and effect. However, this cause and effect has nothing to do with you or me. Wait patiently. One day, someone from the east will come to seek this cause and effect, Buddha Shilai said calmly. The woman nodded and bowed, no longer asking. In the south of the God realm, on the vast and boundless land, a white-haired figure in plain clothes walked forward, appreciating the scenery of the God realm while recovering his cultivation base. After the Tianqi, Ningchen's foundation was rebuilt, and his cultivation base was no longer limited. The path of cultivation was not unfamiliar. With every step Ningchen took, the wind and clouds between heaven and earth stirred. Endless spiritual energy of heaven and earth entered his body, nourishing his dry dantian and sea of qi. Traveling 1,000 miles, his cultivation base improved rapidly. The unparalleled spiritual energy of the God realm made Ningchen's path of cultivation extremely smooth. After walking for a few days, the spiritual energy accumulated in Ningchen's body was enough to break through to the 4th level. On this day, thousands of lightning bolts fell from the sky. Cultivators of the God realm would only face heavenly tribulation when they reached the 4th level. Ningchen swung his sword and cut through the lightning bolts, successfully entering the 4th level. In the distance, demonic energy surged. A pair of eyes were watching the former, waiting for an opportunity. Now, she was still too close to the rising sun divine palace. If she attacked and was discovered by the rising sun god, she would not have a second chance to escape. In the territory of the God realm, Ningchen continued to walk forward day after day as if he did not know. Another 10 days later, heavenly tribulation descended for the second time. The great tribulation of the king realm changed the color of heaven and earth. Tens of thousands of lightning bolts buried the body of the knowing destiny state. Its power was even more terrifying than before. Ningchen walked out of the thousands of lightning bolts. His white hair fluttered, and he was unharmed. 10 steps later, the tribulation clouds in the sky split apart with a bang. It was unknown when the sword light had sliced them apart, and they were split into two. On this day, Ningchen returned to the king realm. His aura was earth-shattering. 1,000 years of cultivation could not be exchanged for a lifetime of companionship. Today, he picked up his sword and returned to the martial path. The path of the knowing destiny state could not be stopped by heaven. Chapter 1350. In the southern border of the god realm, thousands of powerful gods and devils existed in this boundless land. For countless years, they lived in harmony with each other. The realm of the gods was vast and rich in resources. Other than a few rare god materials that would cause fights, there would not be any large-scale wars. In the boundless wasteland, a white-haired figure in plain clothes walked out. After leaving the Sunrise Divine Palace, he headed north. In a few months, Ningchen crossed the wasteland. He did not know how far he had walked. As the seasons changed, the weather gradually became colder. In front of him, he finally reached the end of the wasteland. The tribes of the primitive inhabitants of the realm of the gods could be seen. It was like the prehistoric era of the human race. The people wore the most ancient animal skin clothes. Martial arts were prevalent. Even the most ordinary tribe had a fourth realm expert in charge. As long as one was in the fourth realm, one must master a law of heaven and earth and be powerful enough to move mountains and seas. After being in the realm of the gods for 4 months, Ningchen was already used to it. The power of the realm of the gods was not something that the human world could compare with. Not only were the experts standing at the top, even the ordinary primitive inhabitants of the realm of the gods were much stronger than the martial artists of the human world. The disparity in talent and cultivation resources was not something that could be made up with hard work. Ningchen walked out of the wasteland. In the tribe in front of him, the men plowed the land while the women weaved. The children played back and forth. Everyone had their own duties. It was very lively. Tribe leader, someone is coming. In front of the tribe's tent, a half-naked strong man saw someone coming from afar and reported. In the tent, the tribe leader of the Chi-Hua tribe walked out. He looked ahead and his eyes flashed with surprise. The young man who came from the wasteland was not an ordinary person. Go and say hello. Be careful, the tribe leader of the Chi-Hua tribe said. Yes. Chi-Yun nodded and walked forward. In front of the Chi-Hua tribe, Ningchen walked forward. When he saw the strong man coming from the tribe, he showed a friendly smile and said, I am Ningchen. I am passing by your tribe. May I pass by? When Chi-Yun heard this, he was relieved and replied, Of course. Friend, this way please. After that, Chi-Yun turned around and led the way. Ningchen followed behind them. He looked at the primitive inhabitants of the god realm with a gentle smile on his face. Up ahead, Chi-Yun was also secretly observing the young man behind him. He could also sense that this young man wasn't simple. The grand desolate wilderness was boundless. Being able to walk out of it wasn't something an ordinary person could do. Patriarch, this friend wants to pass through. I'll give him a ride. In front of the largest tent of the Chi-Hua tribe, Chi-Yun stopped and looked at the old man in front of him. He bowed and said respectfully. The chief of the Red Fire tribe looked over and saw the young man behind Chi-Yun. He squinted his old eyes and said, Young man, where are you going? 10,000 Swords Peak. Ningchen said with a smile. The patriarch of the Crimson Fire tribe revealed a strange expression when he heard this and said, The 10,000 Swords Mountain is 1,000,000 miles away from here. Young man, could it be that you intend to walk there like this? Ningchen nodded. He looked into the distance and said, Walking all the way is also a kind of cultivation, isn't it? The chief of the Crimson Fire tribe looked at the young man in front of him and nodded thoughtfully. He had heard that some direct disciples of large clans would use all kinds of methods to train themselves. The young man in front of him must have done so. Thinking about this, the chief of the Crimson Fire tribe looked at the young man in front of him and said, "Chi Yun, send this young man out of the tribe." Chi Yun accepted the order. He looked at the young man behind him and said, "Friend, this way please." "This way please." Ning Chen nodded and followed. Chi Yun led the way. Soon, the two left the tribe. On top of a small mountain, Chi Yun stopped and pointed to the north. "The 10,000 Swords Mountain is in this direction. However, it's quite far from here. Friend, you'll have to walk for some time." "Thank you." Ning Chen bowed politely and walked forward. On the small mountain, Chi Yun looked at the young man's figure and returned to the tribe. In front of the chief's tent of the Crimson Fire tribe, a beautiful woman walked over. She looked at the old man in front of her and said with a smile, "Old man, I have a question. Where did that young man go?" "You are." The chief of the Crimson Fire tribe was confused. "The Shui Yun clan." The woman smiled and said these three words. Hearing this, the chief of the Crimson Fire tribe was shocked and immediately bowed respectfully. "Old man, you don't have to be nervous." The woman smiled and said, "I just want to ask you where the young man went." "The 10,000 Swords Mountain." The chief of the Crimson Fire tribe replied respectfully, "That young man just left. You should be able to catch up with him soon." "Thank you, old man." The woman smiled and said, "Now, it's time to send you off." As soon as she finished speaking, cold air filled the air around the woman. In the entire Crimson Fire tribe, wind and snow blew, and doomsday arrived. The chief of the Crimson Fire tribe's expression changed. Just as he was about to resist, his body was quickly frozen. In just an instant, it spread to his entire body. It was a shocking scene. The woman didn't even raise her hand and the entire Crimson Fire tribe was completely frozen. Everyone turned into ice sculptures and died. In the distance, Chi Yun saw this scene and his body kept trembling. Anger surged in his eyes. In the Crimson Fire tribe, the woman stepped forward and left, chasing after Ning Chen. Not long after the woman left, Chi Yun appeared. Looking at the frozen tribe, he clenched his fists and felt extremely sad and angry. "The Shui Yun clan." Chi Yun's eyes were red and he roared in a low voice. "And the young man just now." On a small mountain in the distance, the woman turned around and looked at the man in the tribe. The corner of her mouth curved into a strange arc. After standing there for a moment, the woman withdrew her gaze and continued to walk forward. Ning Chen didn't know what happened in the Crimson Fire tribe. He continued to walk forward and rushed to the 10,000 Swords Mountain. The jade slip given to him by the moon god had a detailed introduction of the 10,000 Swords Mountain. The 10,000 Swords Mountain could be considered the strongest sword sect in the area. They had a good understanding of sword principles. Every 100 years, the 10,000 Swords Peak would hold a sword conference and invite experts from all over the world. It was very popular in the southern border. Now, it had been almost 100 years since the last sword conference, and the new sword conference would soon begin. He was a sword user and he wanted to see the difference between the swords of the experts of the god world and those of the human world. Ning Chen traveled 1,000,000 miles to the north. He walked step by step on his own two legs. Behind him, the woman followed. She was puzzled. To go to the 10,000 Swords Mountain, one could just fly there. How long would it take to walk there? Curious, the woman was not in a hurry to attack. She patiently followed behind to see what the man in front of her was going to do. 100 days later, in front of the Sunrise Divine Palace, a half-naked man rushed to the palace and knelt down, asking to see the god that the Chihua tribe had worshipped for tens of thousands of years. In front of the moon god palace, the moon god walked out and looked at the kneeling man with a strange look in her eyes. "Yu Ling, go and ask him what's going on," the moon god said. "Yes." Yu Ling walked out and flew down the palace. Half an hour later, Yu Ling returned and said respectfully, "Moon god, he said that he has something important to say to the moon god. It's about the Shui Yun clan." Hearing the word Shui Yun clan, the moon god's eyes narrowed and she nodded. "I understand. You can leave now." Yu Ling bowed and left. After a moment of contemplation, the moon god left the moon god palace and rushed toward the central divine palace. In the central divine palace, golden light filled the vast hall. Blazing divine fire lingered, making it difficult for mortals to get close. In front of the palace, the moon god walked over and said respectfully, "Brother, what's the matter?" The voice of the rising sun dragon god rang out from within the divine hall. "Your Highness, someone wants to see you." "It seems to have something to do with the Shuiyun clan," the moon god replied. After a short silence, the divine fire in the palace burned brightly. The rising sun god, dressed in golden battle robes, walked out. He looked at his sister and said, "The Shuiyun clan is far away in the north. For 100,000 years, they have not interacted with the rising sun divine palace. What could it be?" "I don't know, but that person has been kneeling in front of the palace for a long time. He must have something important to report," the moon god said softly. The rising sun god's eyes narrowed. He nodded and said, "Bring him here." The moon god nodded and raised her delicate hand. Suddenly, Chiyun's body flew up involuntarily. When he came back to his senses, he was already in front of the central divine palace. Chiyun was shocked. When he saw the two people standing in front of the palace, he immediately guessed their identities. Chiyun of the Crimson Fire clan greets the rising sun god and the moon god. Chiyun bowed and said respectfully, "Speak. What are you here for?" The rising sun god asked indifferently, "Hua god, please give justice to the Crimson Fire clan." Chiyun bowed his head and told them everything that had happened with a sorrowful expression. The moon god's eyes were filled with shock when she heard what Chiyun had said. Someone who could freeze the entire Crimson Fire clan without doing anything was at least at the king realm or even the monarch realm. Why would the Shuiyun clan send someone to attack the Crimson Fire clan? Was it a provocation? The empress of the Shuiyun clan didn't seem like such a person. What was going on? "Moon god, the young man he spoke of, is he your high priest?" the rising sun god asked calmly. The moon god nodded and said, "According to his description, he should be. However, the high priest has just ascended to the god realm. It's impossible for him to have anything to do with the Shuiyun clan. There must be something behind this." "Moon god." Chiyun couldn't hide the sorrow in his eyes. After that woman froze the Crimson Fire clan, she chased after that young man. If the two of them have nothing to do with each other, why would she ask about his whereabouts? "Moon god, please deal with this matter on behalf of the Crimson Fire clan." "Impudent!" the rising sun god shouted, his eyes cold. "Elder brother, there's no need to be angry." The moon god sighed softly and looked at the Crimson Fire clan man. "Don't worry. If the high priest really has something to do with this matter, I won't be biased." "Empress Shuiyun." The rising sun god narrowed his eyes. "It seems that I'll have to meet the master of the Shuiyun clan in person." While the news of the Crimson Fire clan's annihilation began to spread, Ning Chen was traveling north. He traveled day and night towards the 10,000 Swords Mountain. The woman who'd led the Crimson Fire clan's annihilation followed behind him. Her charming face was enough to make anyone feel pity for her. Chapter 1351. The 10,000 Swords Mountain was a huge sect that spanned tens of thousands of miles. It was famous in the southern region of the God Realm. The sword technique competition, which was held once every 100 years, was about to begin. Many famous swordsmen in the southern region received invitations and came to compete. Similarly, many swordsmen who didn't receive invitations but wanted to amaze the world in the sword technique competition came from all directions, eager to give it a try. Along the way, Ning Chen saw many swordsmen who were going to participate in the competition. The strongest among them was close to the peak of the Emperor realm. In the southern region, there were many powerful martial artists. However, not all of them had reached the 4th level. After all, not everyone could master a law of heaven and earth. When a law of heaven and earth was mastered, one could form a small world and become an Emperor realm expert. Even in the God realm, an Emperor realm expert who could create a small world could be called a lord. In the God realm, more than 90% of the Emperor realm experts had reached the divine transformation realm. They were much stronger than the emperors of the mortal realm. The most powerful ones were even comparable to the immortal realm emperors of the Antiquity Age. Along the way, Ning Chen was surrounded by sword energy. Every step he took was steady. Behind him, the footprints he left behind were sharp and threatening, revealing his sword intent. After coming to the God realm, Ning Chen changed his low-key style. He didn't have any scruples and didn't hide his sharpness anymore. 1,000 steps away, the void shook and a woman appeared. Looking at the footprints in front of her, a strange look flashed in her beautiful eyes. How did this young man from the mortal realm improve so quickly? In the great wilderness, his aura wasn't so shocking. In just a few months, he seemed to have been reborn. In front of her, Ning Chen walked alone, as if he didn't know that someone was following behind him. His sword intent rose and became more and more intense. The two of them, one in front and one behind, traveled 1,000,000 miles in the God realm. They stopped 100 miles away from the 10,000 Swords Mountain. In the distance, iron chains hung down from the sky. Below the iron chains, a huge sword technique arena was floating. The iron chains were fixed, and it was thousands of feet high. A fight between immortals was the center of attention. It was an incomparably grand scene that satisfied the vanity of many people. They had arrived at the territory of the 10,000 Swords Mountain. In the void, wild beasts roared. All kinds of strange beasts with strange appearances pulled carriages and rushed toward the 10,000 Swords Mountain. Below, Ning Chen stopped for a moment before continuing forward. In front of the mountain gate, the disciples of the 10,000 Swords Peak were waiting outside to welcome them. Anyone who entered the mountain gate had to go through a strict inspection, and even some of the renowned figures were no exception. In the territory of the 10,000 Swords Mountain, even god-fiends wouldn't dare to cause trouble. Legend had it that the 10,000 Swords Mountain had an ancestor, Tianqi, who had lived for tens of thousands of years in the primordial era. His strength was unfathomable. In this world, the strong might not necessarily live for a long time, but if one lived long enough, there would be no weaklings. With such an ancestor overseeing things, none of the guests at the 10,000 Swords Mountain dared to act impudently. They could only accept the inspection according to the rules. When Ning Chen arrived, he followed the group of divine world experts to undergo the inspection before entering the mountain gate. Behind the mountain gate, the scenery before his eyes immediately changed. As far as his eyes could see, sword peaks stood tall and straight into the clouds. Behind the 10,000 Swords Mountain, there were a total of 9,999 sword peaks. Later on, the first-generation sword master of the 10,000 Swords Mountain used his own sword to create the last sword peak, and that was how the 10,000 Swords Mountain got its name. According to the legends, the first-generation sword master of the 10,000 Swords Mountain had terrifying strength comparable to god-fiends. Later on, he disappeared in the final battle between god-fiends, and his whereabouts were unknown ever since. Everyone guessed that the first-generation sword master of the 10,000 Swords Mountain had died in battle. Even the successive generations of sword masters of the 10,000 Swords Mountain thought so. However, no one could be sure of the truth. The truth of what had happened back then could only be completely buried in the river of time as time passed. In the 10,000 Swords Mountain, all the guests were arranged to stay at different sword peaks. There were only a few special sword peaks that the guests were not allowed to go near. One of them was the Taishan Peak left behind by the first-generation sword master of the 10,000 Swords Mountain. Back then, the sword of the first-generation sword master of the 10,000 Swords Mountain was called the Taishan sword. Using a sword to create a peak was a shocking thing. The 10,000 Swords Mountain's foundation for tens of thousands of years was the Taishan sword. It was said that when the current sword master of the 10,000 Swords Mountain wielded the Taishan sword, he could even kill god-fiends. No one knew whether the legend was true or not, because no one had seen it with their own eyes. Even in the realm of the gods, those who were qualified to be called god-fiends were all overlords who had reached the divine transformation realm and stood at the peak of the sovereign realm. On a peak extremely far away from the Taishan Peak, Ning Chen walked to the peak and looked at the Taishan Peak in the distance. His calm eyes did not have the slightest ripple. "Brother, you're also here to see the sword?" On another peak not far away, a young man who looked like a teenager spoke with a friendly smile. "Yes." Ning Chen nodded and smiled. "My name is Fei Yu." What's your name, brother? The young man asked warmly. Ningchen smiled. Brother Ning, you're also here to participate in the sword conference? Fei Yu asked enthusiastically. That's right. Ningchen nodded and said, Brother Fei, you should be here as well. Of course. Fei Yu said proudly, I'm here to get first place. Ningchen smiled and said, then Brother Fei Yu needs to work hard. On the way here, I've seen many experts of the way of the sword. They're all very strong. I'm also very strong. Fei Yu encouraged himself. Ningchen chuckled. This young man's mentality was quite good. As for his strength, he shouldn't be weak either. However, it would be quite difficult to get first place. On the way here, he had seen 3 people with extremely strong sword intent. Each of them had the strength of a divine demon. Brother Ning, you need to work hard too. Fei Yu looked at the former and encouraged him. Ningchen nodded and didn't say anything else. He looked at the distant Tai Xian peak and quietly observed the legendary sword. As the sun set and the moon rose, more and more people gathered on the peaks of the 10,000 Swords Mountain to observe the swordplay. Those who had come to the sword conference were all interested in the Tai Xian sword, which was famous throughout the southern region. Day after day passed. On the various peaks, people who came to watch the sword left one after another. They didn't gain anything. Below Tai Xian Peak, the current sword master of the 10,000 Swords Mountain looked at the remaining 100 or so people on the various peaks. His aged eyes flashed with surprise. After more than 20 days, there were still 100 or so people left. It seemed that the young people of this generation had good temperaments. Not far from Tai Xian Peak, a white-robed swordsman stood quietly. He was handsome and looked to be in his 20s. However, all the disciples of the 10,000 Swords Mountain knew that this Tai Peak master was a peerless expert who had lived for nearly 10,000 years. Even the sword master had to be polite to him. At this moment, Tai Xian Peak, which had been quiet for thousands of years, suddenly shook. The sword pressure rose and showed signs of recovery. Below Tai Xian Peak, the sword master of the 10,000 Swords Mountain felt it. He was shocked and looked at the various peaks. Someone was comprehending the sword. Who was it? The sword master of the 10,000 Swords Mountain flashed and came to the sky above Tai Xian Peak to look for the person who was comprehending the sword. However, in just an instant, the strange movements of Tai Xian Peak stopped and the sword pressure was withdrawn. In the distance, Ningchen walked down the peak and left with the remaining 100 people. On the neighboring peak, Fei Yu looked regretful when he saw this. What a pity! Before leaving, the elders of the clan told him that Tai Xian Peak contained the sword intent of the first sword master. If he looked carefully, he would definitely gain something. It was not easy for Brother Ning to hold on for so long. What a pity! Why not hold on for a few more days? Just after Ningchen left the peak, the white-robed swordsman on Tai Xian Peak disappeared without a trace. At the foot of the peak, Ningchen walked down step by step. At this moment, a white sword light flew from the distance and appeared 10 steps away. The white-robed man had a peerless cultivation. He did not move his aura, but his powerful might was already unbearable. 10 steps away, the two looked at each other. Neither of them was too surprised. After a long time, Ningchen smiled faintly and strode forward. The moment they passed each other, their auras collided. The absolute sword intent directly cracked the ground below. In 10 days, the sword competition will end. There will be a good show in front of Tai Xian Peak. Do you want to see it? The white-robed man asked calmly. Ningchen heard this and stopped. He narrowed his eyes and said, I can't ask for more. Chapter 1352. The white-robed man's name was Tai Yi. This was his name after he became the peak master of Tai Yi Peak. As for his original name, he had long forgotten it after thousands of years. No one could doubt the strength of the peak master of Tai Yi Peak, not even the current peak master of 10,000 Swords Peak. If one had to describe him, it would be unfathomable. Ningchen and the peak master of Tai Yi Peak did not make a single move. They left behind a bottomless crack that extended to half of the peak. In the distance, a beautiful woman walked out. Looking at the cracked sword peak, her expression froze. Every single sword peak of the 10,000 Swords Mountain had been reinforced by special formations, which was why they were able to endure for hundreds of thousands of years. Now, just the collision of their sword intents was enough to cause a sword peak to collapse. From this, it could be seen how frightening their cultivation in the sword was. It was not strange for the peak master of Tai Peak to have such attainments. However, this swordsman who ascended from the mortal realm was also unfathomable. It was truly shocking. It seemed that she had to find a chance to further investigate this person's background. Time passed. 5 days later, floating islands rose around the sword discourse arena. The sword discourse competition was about to begin. On one of the floating islands, the current swordmaster of 10,000 Swords Peak and a few other peak masters appeared and announced the start of the sword discourse competition. The rules of the competition were simple. Everyone would go on stage together. The last 10 people would get the chance to comprehend the sword below Tai Xian Peak for 3 days. Unlike before, if they could comprehend the sword below Tai Xian Peak, they would have a great chance of receiving the inheritance of the first swordmaster. Other than the 10 places to comprehend the sword, the first place of the sword discourse competition would also receive a scroll of the scripture of Tai Xian. It was rumored that the scripture of Tai Xian was a rare top-notch cultivation method in the god realm. Even if there was only one scroll, it would be greatly beneficial to one's future cultivation. On one of the floating islands, Ning Chen heard the rules and rewards of the competition. He had a plan in mind. He was not interested in the scripture of Tai Xian. He already had enough cultivation methods. However, he was determined to get the chance to comprehend the sword for 3 days. "Brother Ning!" Behind him, Fei Yu waved and shouted. Ning Chen looked back and saw the young man behind him. He smiled and said, "You're here too?" "What a coincidence," Fei Yu said excitedly. "Brother Ning, after we go down, why don't we form an alliance?" "Alliance?" When Ning Chen heard this, a strange expression appeared on his face. After thinking for a moment, he nodded and said, "Sure." "Then it's settled." Fei Yu stepped forward and said happily, "Brother Ning, although I can't give you the first place, I can still help you get into the top 10. In that case, thank you very much, Brother Fei Yu." Ning Chen smiled and replied. While the two of them were talking, a 10,000 Swords Peak Lord flew down from the sky above the Sword Discourse Arena and announced the start of the Sword Discourse Tournament. "Let's go," Ning Chen said calmly. He took a step forward and flew towards the Sword Discourse Arena. Fei Yu followed behind him. Although he was young, his skills were pretty good. In the next moment, thousands of swordsmen descended from the sky on the sparring platform. Their auras were fully released, and they were all on guard. According to the rules of the Sword Discourse Arena, if one's body left the edge of the arena, he or she would be disqualified. In addition, no one was allowed to kill anyone. Otherwise, he or she would be disqualified. On the Sword Discourse Arena, there were 3 extremely powerful auras. They were so clear that they were far above everyone else. Sovereign Tao. Moreover, it was the Sovereign Tao of a divine transformation realm cultivator. His divine essence surged, suppressing everyone present. Outside the Sword Discourse Arena, on a floating island, many peak lords stood quietly, looking down with different expressions. 3 Sovereign Tao of a divine transformation realm cultivator. "This year's Sword Discourse competition will be quite interesting," a peak master said with anticipation. There had always been a lot of debate about the timing of a divine transformation realm cultivator. Many people chose to become a divine transformation realm cultivator as soon as they reached the 4th plane in pursuit of greater power. However, there were also some people who chose to do it step by step. After reaching the Sovereign Tao, they would choose to become a divine transformation realm cultivator. Of course, there were also extreme people who chose to become a divine transformation realm cultivator when they could no longer improve their cultivation at the peak of the Sovereign Tao. There were very few people like that because it was too difficult to reach the peak of the Sovereign Tao without the help of divine essence. No matter what, Sovereign Tao cultivators who had divine essence were far more powerful than ordinary Sovereign Tao cultivators. With these 3 people around, the others almost had no chance to break through. Behind the peak masters, the Tai peak master in white looked down, but he was not interested at all. Junior brother Tai Wai? Are you not interested? The sword master beside him asked. The result is clear. This sword discourse competition is meaningless, the Tai Peak master said calmly. Hearing that, the sword master sighed softly and said, although there are 3 divine transformation realm cultivators, there is only one winner. It is still worth watching. A cold smile flashed in the Tai Peak master's eyes, but he did not explain further. How could the sword be decided by cultivation? On the sword discourse arena, a chaotic battle began. Ning Chen and Fei Yu, 2 young people who had just met, formed an alliance. At least, compared to the many old monsters present, they were still young. Fei Yu's strength was not bad. Like Ning Chen, he was a half-step sovereign Dao cultivator. Among the many cultivators present, he was not the strongest, but he was not the weakest either. The 2 of them worked together and defeated many old monsters who wanted to blast them out of the sword discourse arena. Ning Chen did not want to reveal his strength too early. Every time he won, it was very dangerous. Sometimes he even needed Fei Yu's help. Of course, Ning Chen also secretly helped Fei Yu a few times. After all, there were some strong cultivators present. In an hour's time, hundreds of figures were blasted away at the edge of the sword discourse arena. They were like dumplings, and it was a spectacular sight. Ning Chen and Fei Yu fought closer and closer to the border. When there were only a few hundred people left on the sword discourse arena, many people looked at them. The 2 of them looked too young. Although their cultivations were not weak, they were still seen as weak. After all, cultivation was not the only thing that determined one's strength. Battle experience was also important. Those who had lived for a long time must have rich battle experience. The 2 of them were too young. Listen to me later. When I say run, run immediately. Seeing the unfriendly gazes of the people around him, Ning Chen reminded him. I still want to get first place. How can I run away? Fei Yu said unwillingly. It's just a strategic retreat. Do you think you can fight so many people? Ning Chen said. Fei Yu glanced at the dozen people who were closing in on him and immediately shut up. When the 10 people were about to surround Xiao Qin, Ning Chen saw an opportunity and shouted. After he said that, Ning Chen's figure flashed and fled into the distance. Behind him, Fei Yu gritted his teeth and quickly followed. The dozen people's faces darkened. They also chased after him. In the huge sword discourse arena, 2 people were running for their lives. Behind them, a dozen people were chasing them. The scene shocked everyone. What a farce! In the center of the sword discourse arena, one of the 3 divine transformation realm emperors was a purple-clothed man. He waved his sword and a majestic sword pressure tried to swallow everyone in the farce. In the front, Ning Chen pulled Fei Yu behind him and turned around. With a strange angle and movement, he dodged the sword chi. Behind them, the dozen swordsmen were not so lucky. They were swallowed by the sword chi and blasted out of the sword discourse arena. That was close. Behind Ning Chen, Fei Yu wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead with lingering fear. They were so close to being blasted off the cliff. In the center of the sword discourse arena, the purple-clothed man frowned. Was it luck? His attack was actually dodged. Stay away from them. Feeling the gazes of the people around the sword discourse arena, Ning Chen reminded him softly. Then, he flew toward a place where there was no one. After what happened just now, Fei Yu trusted Ning Chen a lot more. He quickly followed Ning Chen. On the sword discourse arena, less than 100 people were facing each other. At this point, none of the people left were weak. No one dared to act rashly. Of course, the 3 of them were an exception. In the center of the sword discourse arena, the 3 of them looked at each other and walked toward different directions. It was not the time for their final battle yet. Before that, they had to get rid of all those people who were in their way. In a corner of the sword discourse arena, Ning Chen looked at the 3 of them. He adjusted his direction and kept the furthest distance from them. Behind him, Fei Yu looked at him with a strange expression and said, "Brother Ning?" Ning Chen turned around and asked, "What's wrong? Are you good at running away?" Fei Yu asked in confusion. Ning Chen smiled and said, "I know a little." After that, Ning Chen looked away and continued to watch the battle. Half a day passed in the blink of an eye. There were less and less people left on the sword discourse arena. Ning Chen and Fei Yu became more and more conspicuous. Finally, among the 3 divine transformation realm emperors, the purple-clothed swordsman who attacked them before stared at the 2 of them again and walked toward them. Seeing the purple-clothed swordsman approaching, Fei Yu's expression immediately became serious. He was ready to fight with all his strength. "Brother Fei Yu, let me deal with this person. You save your energy first. You can attack when you meet a stronger opponent." Ning Chen walked forward and said calmly. Chapter 1353. In the southern region of the divinity, a huge sword discourse arena was floating in the air. For iron chains that were more than 10 feet thick were holding it in place. On the sword discourse arena, sword chi was everywhere. Many people were blown away. Even those who were at the king realm or even at the imperial level were so weak in front of the 3 divine transformation realm emperors. There were less than 50 contestants left on the sword discourse arena. The 3 divine transformation realm emperors started to clean up the remaining contestants. At a corner of the sword discourse arena, a purple-robed swordsman walked over with his sword in hand. A divine transformation realm emperor's power couldn't be measured by common sense. After all, after reaching the divine transformation realm, one's vital essence would transform into divine essence and become closer to the origin of heaven and earth. In front of Fei Yu, Ning Chen stepped forward. He grabbed his sword with his right hand and a purple light shone. "Are you not going to run anymore?" The purple-robed swordsman sneered and stepped forward. The swordsmen fought and the sound of their swords was shrill. The 2 swords clashed fiercely. The 10 moves were fierce. In order to save time and end the battle quickly, the purple-robed swordsman didn't hold back. He gave it his all. However, to everyone's surprise, the purple-robed swordsman's moves were all countered. The expected one-sided battle didn't happen. On the floating island outside the sword discourse arena, the peak masters of the 10,000 Swords Mountain looked at the battle below with interest. The white-haired young man's moves were quite interesting. They seemed ordinary, but he seemed to be able to predict his opponent's moves and suppress his opponent's moves to the greatest extent. If they didn't know how powerful the purple-robed swordsman was, they would have thought that this battle was just a normal fight between warriors. "Tai, your sword cultivation is the highest. Who do you think will win?" A peak master asked the Tai peak master who was not far away. "The stronger one," the Tai peak master said lightly. The other peak masters were speechless. The Tai peak master was still a man of few words. On the sword discourse arena, the battle between the 2 was getting more and more intense. The purple-robed swordsman was getting more and more shocked. There was something wrong with this guy. It was as if his sword had sunk into a quagmire. He gradually lost control of his sword and found it difficult to use his full strength. The more the purple-clothed swordsman fought, the angrier he became. His attacks became even fiercer. However, going too far was just as bad as not going far enough. An opening immediately appeared. It was only an instant before a white-clothed figure flashed past. An incomparably powerful palm landed on the purple-clothed swordsman's chest. "Ugh!" With a muffled groan, the purple-robed swordsman's figure flew out 1,000 feet and was about to fall off the sword discourse arena. At the critical moment, the purple-robed swordsman stepped in the air and quickly turned back, slashing down with his sword. The surging sword chi was incomparably powerful and full of killing intent. Outside the battlefield, Fei Yu looked quite nervous as he yelled, "Be careful!" Seeing that the tide of the battle was about to turn, everyone's eyes focused as they waited for the final result. Everyone's attention was focused on the man and the sword. Suddenly, a dazzling light burst out from the man and the sword. The moment the purple-robed swordsman approached, Ning Chen's body moved, and his sword moved as well. He no longer hid his sword, and his sword shocked the world. With a loud rumble, the 2 beams of sword light clashed. The radiance of the man and the sword could destroy the world, and directly knocked the purple-robed swordsman off the sword discourse arena. The sudden change caused everyone inside and outside the sword discourse arena to reveal shocked expressions. At the edge of the sword discourse arena, Fei Yu also looked at the white-clothed man in front of him in disbelief. At this moment, It was as if he could no longer understand this person. After dealing with the trouble in front of him, Ningchen looked at the two divine transformation realm sovereigns who were looking at him from afar and nodded in greeting. The two of them nodded in greeting as well. Then they looked away and stopped looking at each other. This young man is actually so powerful. We have underestimated him. On the floating island, the current swordmaster of the 10,000 Swords Mountain said with a smile. This person is too good at hiding. Even we were fooled by him. A peak master frowned and said. He did not hide on purpose. It's just that these people are too weak to attract his interest, the Tai peak master said lightly from not far away. Hearing this, the other peak masters looked at each other, and there was a strange look in their eyes. It was the first time that the Tai peak master spoke for someone else. Brother Fei Yu. On the sword discourse arena, Ningchen turned around and looked at the young man who was still in shock. He smiled and said, "Let's go." Fei Yu came back to his senses and said with a complicated expression, "You are so powerful. I have always wanted to help you get into the top 10. It seems like I was thinking too much." Ningchen smiled and said, "How old do you think I am?" 300? Fei Yu was startled and said, "I have lived for more than 1,000 years." Ningchen smiled and said, "After living for so long, you need to have some skills to protect yourself. You are still young. With your talent, you will surpass me sooner or later." Fei Yu thought about it, and the anger in his heart subsided. He smiled and said, "You are right. I am not angry at you anymore. I will give you the first place this time. I will just get into the top 10. Ningchen smiled and said, "The first place is still yours. I have no use for the Taishin scripture." After that, Ningchen looked at the few people left on the sword discourse arena and said, "Let's go." Fei Yu nodded and followed him. As Ningchen made his move, the sword discourse arena officially entered its final stage. The remaining dozens of people were eliminated one after another. Soon, there were only 4 people left on the enormous sword discourse arena. 2 divine transformation realm emperors walked over from different directions. It was a man and a woman. The man held a heavy sword and was extremely powerful. He was born with great strength and was extremely powerful. In comparison, the woman who walked over from the other direction looked a bit weaker. Her delicate face made people feel sorry for her. She did not show any shocking strength during the entire competition. However, Ning Chen's attention was more focused on the woman. It was not because she was pretty, but because she was very powerful. At least, she was more powerful than the man. "For a view one-on-one?" The man with the heavy sword said in a serious tone. "Sure." The woman nodded and agreed. Ning Chen smiled and said, "I will not beat around the bush. Fei Yu is not your opponent. I have also promised to help him get the first place. You two can come at me together." The man sneered and said, "Don't you think you are too arrogant?" "I am not being arrogant. I am just speaking the truth." As he spoke, the smile on Ning Chen's face gradually disappeared. He raised his sword and the sound of it whistled. "Since you are so confident, then I will offend you." As soon as she finished speaking, the woman moved. Her sword was as fast as lightning and it showed its shocking power for the first time. Ning Chen leaned to the side and dodged the sword radiance. Before he could counterattack, the heavy sword hit him from behind. It was earth-shattering. "You are too skillful." Ning Chen waved his sword and blocked the heavy sword. He glanced at the sword in the woman's hand. He turned his hand and pushed the woman back. Swoosh! The sword was fast and deadly. The moment the fragrance came, the cold blade followed. The woman's sword was as fast as lightning. Thousands of sword radiances appeared with each attack. Fake and real. Ning Chen waved his sword and shattered the thousands of sword radiances. He put his left hand together and stopped the deadly sword. The sword radiance shook violently. The woman was knocked dozens of feet away and took several steps back. It was a shocking battle. Knowing Destiny was fighting against 2 people alone and still had the upper hand. In the battle, the 2 divine transformation realm emperors looked at each other. They could not hide the shock in their eyes. This person's strength was actually so strong. On the floating island, the peak leaders of the 10,000 Swords Mountain also looked serious. The The victory just now was due to the opponent's underestimation of the enemy. But now, there was no possibility of any tricks. The strength of this plain-clothed young man was immeasurable. Do you have any more trump cards? Ning Chen looked at the two people in front of him. He was full of anticipation. His main purpose of coming here was to see the difference between the swords of the divinity's swordsmen and those of the mortal world. If that was all, he would be disappointed. This move was meant to be used at the last moment. It seems that I have to use it now. The woman stepped forward and clenched her left hand. The second sword appeared. Dual swords. Ning Chen squinted his eyes. The way to use dual swords was different from a single sword. Compared to a single sword, dual swords were more difficult to master. In the battle, the two swords were drawn. The sword radiances were like two dragons that showed their sharpness. The woman took a step forward. Thunder shook the world as her silhouette flashed out. She reached out her delicate hands. The two swords turned into dragons and swallowed knowing destiny. Borrowing the power of others? Ning Chen said softly. The corner of his mouth curled up. This was interesting. Chapter 1354. On the Sword Discourse Arena, the two Divine Transformation Realm sovereigns teamed up to fight against the Knowing Destiny Realm. The two dragons swallowed the sky, and the wind swept away the clouds. It was a shocking scene. The dragons roared in the wild. Under everyone's gaze, the woman flew across the sky. Ning Chen squinted his eyes, and the desire to fight rose in his eyes. Finally, there was something that he was interested in. Not far away, the man with the heavy sword also poured in his divine vitality and performed his most powerful move. Ha! The man shouted and held the sword with both hands. In the void, the shadow of a giant mountain appeared, and it was more than 10,000 feet tall. The heavy sword had no edge, and the man turned into a god. With one sword he split Mount Hua. Boom! The sword slashed down, and the mountains split apart. The shocking sword will spread to the battlefield. The two Divine Transformation Realm sovereigns performed their most powerful moves. In the center of the battle, the desire to fight in Ning Chen's eyes was getting stronger, and his sword will was getting stronger. The man and the sword flew across the sky. Ning Chen waved his sword and went up to meet the two shocking sword moves. Outside the battle, on the floating island, the 10,000 Swords Peak Masters were shocked. Was this man going to meet the two's moves head-on? He was too arrogant. Not far away, the Tai Peak Master's eyes flashed. Why did he do such a meaningless thing? In the battle, there was an earth-shattering tremor. Ning Chen met the two sword moves head-on. The sword discourse arena under him shook, and cracks spread quickly. Drip. Blood dripped onto the sword discourse arena. In the battle, Ning Chen blocked the two's moves. The corner of his mouth was red. So, this is the sword of the divinity. It is indeed different. Unfortunately, this level is not enough to defeat me. Ning Chen said softly. The sword will around him rose and dissolved the remaining power. In the next moment, Ning Chen moved and his figure disappeared. With a strange movement technique, he split into two in an instant. The same powerful palm imprinted on the backs of the two Divine Transformation Realm sovereigns. Blood splashed everywhere. The two Divine Transformation Realm sovereigns couldn't help but fly out. Before the crowd could come back to their senses, the battle had already ended. The absolute gap in strength made the battle end before it reached its peak. The two Divine Transformation Realm sovereigns didn't even perform half of their strength. They were suppressed. Only the last move could they show the power of the Divine Transformation Realm. Unfortunately, the moment the two of them unleashed their moves, the outcome of the battle was already decided. Strong, so strong that it was shocking. Outside the battle arena, the swordsman who had been eliminated long ago looked at the plain-clothed young man on the sword discourse arena, unable to suppress the shock in their hearts. Who was this person? Why had he never heard of him before? It's very likely that he hasn't used his full strength yet, the 10,000 Swords Peak's sword master said solemnly on the floating island. Could he be a reincarnated god fiend? A peak master guessed. I don't think so. The 10,000 Swords Peak's sword master shook his head. Reincarnated fiend gods all have auras that are different from ordinary people. This child doesn't have such an aura. On the sword discourse arena, the results of the competition were about to be announced. Ningchen looked at Fei Yu behind him and smiled. I have done what I promised you. After he finished speaking, Ningchen took a step forward and flashed out of the sword discourse arena. On the floating island, the peak masters looked at each other. Was this person really going to give up on the #1 spot? The scene was so quiet. The sword conference competition had ended. Even Fei Yu, who was on the sword conference arena, was stunned. Cough cough. In the sky above the sword discourse arena, a peak master of the 10,000 swords peak appeared and said, "The competition has ended. The winner is Fei Yu." As soon as he finished speaking, the whole place was in an uproar. They didn't know what to say. Everyone, the 10,000 swords peak has prepared immortal fruits and spirit wine for everyone to enjoy. Also, the top 10 of the competition, please follow me. The peak master of the 10,000 swords peak looked at the many swordsmen on the floating islands and smiled. On each floating island, the powerful swordsmen who were eliminated in the end walked out and flew forward. Ningchen was among them. After feeling the unfriendly gazes not far away, he smiled faintly and ignored them. The top 10 of the sword conference competition had gathered. They were led by the peak master who was in charge of the competition and flew towards Tai Xian Peak. Brother Ning, thank you. Fei Yu looked at the white-haired man beside him and said seriously, if you need me in the future, as long as Brother Ning says the word, Fei Yu will go through water and tread on fire without hesitation. It's nothing. Ningchen smiled. If I really need Brother Fei Yu's help in the future, I won't be polite. He almost didn't know anyone in the God realm. Although this Fei Yu was a little immature, he was indeed someone who could be friends with him. They had only met by chance twice, and he said that he would help him obtain the top 10 qualifications. What was even more commendable was that this young man really did try his best. Under the lead of a peak master of the 10,000 swords peak, the 10 arrived in front of Tai Xian Peak. The majestic peak was like a sharp sword that pierced through the clouds. This was a rare opportunity. The 10 stood on the sword peak and focused on comprehending the sword intent contained in Tai Xian Peak. 3 days was neither long nor short. In the first day and night, the 10 of them looked at almost every rock on Tai Xian Peak, but they didn't find anything. Tai Xian Peak looked like a blunt sword from afar. When they got closer, they couldn't see its full appearance. They could only feel the heavy pressure. After the sword conference competition ended, all the swordsmen who came to participate in the competition left one after another. Most of them were regretful that they didn't use their full strength. Among the crowd, the purple-robed swordsman looked abnormally gloomy. He could barely suppress the anger in his heart. He was a divine transformation realm sovereign Dao, but he didn't even get into the top 10. It was all because of that person. Outside the 10,000 swords peak, the purple-robed swordsman stopped and looked back at the place where he was humiliated. His eyes were filled with hatred. Do you hate him? At this moment, a beautiful woman walked over and asked. Hearing this, the purple-robed swordsman was shocked. He looked at the woman who was walking over and was shocked. When did this person come? The woman stepped forward and disappeared in an instant. She flew in front of the purple-robed swordsman. Fast, unbelievably fast. The woman raised her hand and pierced it into the purple-robed swordsman's dantian. The purple-robed swordsman was shocked. He wanted to resist, but his body couldn't move. Endless divine power flowed out and was swallowed by the woman. Even a divine transformation realm sovereign Dao was defeated in one move. Who are you? The purple-robed swordsman looked at the woman in front of him and said unwillingly. The woman smiled, pulled out her right hand, and walked away. On the ground, the purple-robed swordsman fell. His body kept twitching, and all his divine sources were taken away. Inside the 10,000 swords peak, in front of Tai Xian Peak, no one knew what had happened outside the mountain. The 10 people had been standing in front of the peak comprehending the sword for more than 2 days. At that time, the strange movement at Tai Xian Peak didn't happen again. Although the 10 people had gained something in 2 days, it was very little. The sword will on Tai Xian Peak was cryptic and difficult to understand. It was almost incomprehensible. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. In front of the peak, Ningchen looked away and smiled helplessly. No one comprehended it. Outside Taishan Peak, the various peak masters revealed strange expressions as they spoke. This year, there were many experts, but no one could comprehend the sword will on Taishan Peak. On the side, the Tai Peak leader looked at the plain-robed young man in the distance. He didn't find it strange that others didn't comprehend it. Why didn't this person comprehend it? Boom! At this moment, Taishan Peak suddenly shook. The sword will soared into the sky, shocking the world. Someone comprehended it. All the peak leaders were shocked. They looked at the 10 people in front of the peak. Who was it? In front of Taishan Peak, Fei Yu's body trembled violently. A powerful sword will rose, and his aura kept rising. Not far away, Ningchen looked over at the young man in front of him. He smiled. Comprehended it? This Fei Yu's comprehension was really good. 3 days had passed. In front of Taishan Peak, except for Fei Yu, the other 9 people, including Ningchen, were all taken away from Taishan Peak. Hundreds of miles away, on a sword peak, Ningchen walked over and looked at Taishan Peak in the distance. He watched quietly. At this moment, on the sword peak, the Tai Peak leader in white walked out and said calmly, "You really didn't comprehend the sword will on Taishan Peak?" "I understood some of it, but I didn't accept it," Ningchen said with a smile. "Why?" the Tai Peak leader asked. "That was the sword of the first sword master, not mine." Ningchen smiled. "Moreover, didn't Taishan Peak sword get a better inheritor?" "Wrong." The Tai Peak leader said in a low voice, "Since the existence of the 10,000 Swords Mountain, every 100 years, there will be 10 people who get the chance to comprehend the sword will. Even if there is only 1 in 100 who comprehends the sword will, there will be many inheritors after hundreds of thousands of years. But what about these people?" After that, the Tai Peak leader looked at Taishan Peak in the distance. It had been 10,000 years. He had endured it for too long. When Ningchen heard this, his expression changed. At this moment, behind Taishan Peak, an extremely powerful pressure was awakened. It was like the way of heaven, and no one could go against it. Chapter 1355. Taishan Peak, Fei Yu comprehended the sword. After 1,000 years, someone had comprehended the Taishan sword will again. In an instant, Taishan Peak shook, and an extremely heavy pressure spread throughout the 10,000 Swords Mountain. Hundreds of miles away, the Tai Peak master looked at the white-haired young man behind him and said, "Next, there will be a good show of deceiving your master. Do you dare to watch?" "Why wouldn't I?" Ningchen's eyes narrowed slightly as he replied. "Please." The Tai Peak master said calmly and flew towards Taishan Peak. On the sword peak behind him, Ningchen stepped lightly and followed him. At Taishan Peak, a pressure rose like the way of the heavens. The 10,000 Swords Mountain sword master and the 6 peak masters felt it and immediately bowed. "Welcome back, Grand Elder." Before they finished speaking, the ground below Taishan Peak shook even more violently. Amidst the rumbling, a dim light rose into the sky, and an elder in ancient clothing walked out. His aura was terrifying, like a god or a demon. Grand Elder Taishan came out of seclusion and looked at Fei Yu, who was comprehending in front of him. He smiled and said, "Are you willing to join my Taishan Peak and learn more advanced Taishan sword techniques?" Hearing this, Fei Yu's eyes flashed with excitement, and he immediately knelt down to acknowledge him as his master. Grand Elder Taishuan's strength was well known throughout the southern border of the God realm. He could be said to be a god-level existence. If he could become his master, it would be the best thing. However, just as Fei Yu was about to kneel down, a powerful sword pressure spread out in front of Taishan Peak, preventing Fei Yu from kneeling down. "Young man, there is no need to kneel." In the distance, the Tai Peak master, who was dressed in white, walked over with a cold look on his face. In front of Taishan Peak, the 10,000 Swords Mountain sword master and the 6 peak masters were shocked. What was Tai trying to do? Don't be presumptuous." The 10,000 Swords Mountain's sword master shouted. "Sword master, when I agreed to take over the position of Tai Peak master, you should know why," the Tai Peak Master replied coldly. The Tai Peak Master replied coldly. His sword will become more and more shocking. Even in the face of great ancestor Taishuan's shocking pressure, it was not inferior at all. Peak Lords, I'm sure you haven't completely forgotten why we sword cultivators picked up swords in the first place. Over the past tens of thousands of years, the bones of too many innocent people have been buried under Taishan Peak. Step by step, the Tai Peak Master looked at Ancestor Taishan and said coldly, Ancestor, I would like to know how you felt when you personally took the lives and sword intent of the disciples you nurtured with all your heart for hundreds of thousands of years? How dare you? Patriarch Taishan's expression darkened. A mere junior dares to question me? Who gave you the courage? It's my sword heart. The Tai Peak Master replied calmly. Grand Elder, this is no longer your era. What can you do even if you force yourself to stay in this world? Grand Elder, please be at ease and enter the Tao. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone's expression changed. Had Tai gone mad? How dare he say that it was treason and heresy? Not far away, Ningchen pulled up Flying Feather, who had been suppressed by their sword intents, and said, Let's go. Stay away from them. Fei Yu nodded in a daze. He still didn't understand what was going on. What's wrong? The two stopped 1,000 steps away. Fei Yu looked at the man beside him and asked. This sword technique competition is a scam. Ningchen smiled. At first, I didn't understand either. I only found out about it not long ago. Then, Ningchen looked at the Taishan Peak Master and said, Ancestor Taishan might be the first sword master. Hearing this, Fei Yu's expression changed. He cried out, How is that possible? The 10,000 Swords Mountain had existed for more than 100,000 years. In the deity world, other than a few deities with extremely powerful bloodlines, no one had ever lived for so long. It's not easy to live for so long, but it's also not difficult, Ningchen said calmly. As long as you're willing to give up some things, such as your dignity, your bottom line, and your humanity. It didn't matter whether Ancestor Taishan was the first sword master or not. What was important was that Ancestor Taishan was only angry at the Tai Peak Master's question, but he didn't refute it. This meant that the Tai Peak Master's words were the truth. Sometimes, human nature was so ugly that it couldn't see the light of day. In front of Taishan Peak, the Tai Peak Master's words of treason and betrayal had completely enraged Ancestor Taishan. Tai! The Peak Masters of the 10,000 Swords Mountain shouted anxiously. Don't be impudent. Quickly kneel and beg for forgiveness from the Ancestor. In front, the Tai Peak Master ignored them. He spoke again and said aggressively, Ancestor, please be at ease and transform. Very good. The 10,000 Swords Mountain that I created has really produced a good grand disciple. Ancestor Taishan was so angry that he laughed. His aura became more and more terrifying. Raging waves rolled, and the world lost its color. Amidst the raging waves, the Tai Peak Master's expression didn't change. He looked at Tai Peak in the distance and said, Your sword. In the distance, on Tai Peak, a child knelt on the ground, holding an ancient divine sword in his hands. In the next moment, the divine sword in the child's hand was unsheathed. The peerless divine weapon cut through the void of the deity world and flew in front of Taishan Peak. With a clang, the Tai divine sword landed in front of the Tai Peak Master. The sword's body was covered with runes and looked extraordinary. It was a shocking scene. The Tai Peak Master pointed his sword at Ancestor Taishan. His action of deceiving his master shocked all the Peak Masters present. In the distance, Fei Yu looked at the Tai Peak Master's actions and was shocked. He couldn't help but ask the man beside him, Brother Ning, why does the Tai Peak Master dare to challenge Ancestor Taishan? Ancestor Taishan was almost at the level of a god fiend. No matter how strong the Tai Peak Master was, he couldn't defeat a god fiend. The way of the sword isn't as simple as you think, Ningchen said calmly as he looked at the battle in front of him. Ningchen looked at the great battle that was about to break out in the distance and said calmly, when the sword is at its peak, even if the opponent is a true god or demon, he can still fight. Now, let's see if the Tai Peak Master's sword attainments can reach this level. Hearing this, Fei Yu was shocked. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Brother Ning, what about you?" Ning Chen smiled gently and said, "How should I put it? Under normal circumstances, when I meet a really powerful god fiend, I still have to run." Fei Yu nodded thoughtfully. Brother Ning's words weren't full and left too much room for discussion. "Watch the battle carefully. Perhaps this battle will completely change the world of the way of the sword in your eyes," Ning Chen said with a smile. Fei Yu nodded and stopped thinking about it. He looked forward and watched the battle seriously. Everyone watched as the Tai Peak Master went against the flow and challenged Ancestor Tai Xian. The battle was about to start. Thunder roared in the sky. The shocking scene indicated that the battle to come would be extremely tragic. Ha! In front of Ancestor Tai Xian, the Tai Peak Master pointed his finger and raised his sword. In an instant, the entire 10,000 Swords Mountain was filled with the sound of swords. Thousands of swords screeched, and the loud sword chime echoed throughout the mountain range. What a loud sword chime! Outside the battlefield, the sword masters covered their ears with their hands, their faces full of shock. In the distance, Ning Chen looked at the battle and narrowed his eyes. The Tai Peak Master's sword might also change his understanding of the way of the sword. How different would the sword of the mortal world be from the sword of the god world? In front of Taishan Peak, the Tai Peak Master displayed his shocking swordsmanship. The loud sword chime was deafening. In front, Ancestor Tai Xian's eyes were cold. He raised his hands to the sky, and the entire Taishan Peak rose from the ground. He used the mountain as a sword to kill the junior who had betrayed his master. Tai Sword Lotus! The Tai Peak Master shouted. The Tai Divine Sword soared into the sky, and a lotus appeared in the air. A huge chaotic green lotus appeared, and light spread out, suppressing all the ways in the world. Taishan Peak, which was falling from the sky, was swept by the chaotic green lotus. It immediately flew hundreds of miles away and crashed into a sword peak. The Tai Sword Lotus suppressed Taishan Peak. It was unprecedented to use the sword to enter the way. Ha! The Tai Peak Master shouted again. He pointed his sword at Ancestor Tai Xian and pressed it down. In an instant, the chaotic green lotus bloomed, and a shocking sword pressure swept through the world. It turned into invisible sword chi and slashed at Ancestor Tai Xian below. In the distance, the current sword master looked at the battle and sighed in his heart. Tai, is this your way of the sword? As a sword master, he felt ashamed to face this junior. Boom! In front of Taishan Peak, the chaotic green lotus bloomed. Sword will exploded, killing Ancestor Tai Xian. At the critical moment, sword peaks moved in front of Ancestor Tai Xian, blocking the invisible sword chi. The rumbling continued, and hundreds of sword peaks collapsed. Amidst the flying rocks, great Ancestor Tai Xian rushed out. His withered right hand grasped at the air, and a sword appeared. He slashed down with it, counterattacking strongly. In front of the Tai Peak Master, the chaotic green lotus fell, blocking the attack. The sword chi broke the protective light. The Tai Peak Master grunted, and the corners of his mouth turned red. Because of the huge difference in cultivation, the Tai Peak Master was stained red for the first time. However, his fighting spirit did not decrease at all. Today, I will use my blood to cleanse this dirty Taishan Peak. 10 steps away, the Tai Peak Master stopped. He formed sword fingers with both hands, and blood mist spewed out from his body. After a short silence, the sky shook. With a boom, a shocking blood-colored crack appeared, spreading rapidly to tens of thousands of miles away. Chapter 1356. Crack in the Sky. In front of Taishan Peak, the Tai Peak Master bathed the sky in blood. Boundless sword pressure filled the air, causing chaos in the 9 heavens. A huge crack appeared in the sky. Under the extreme sword pressure, even the sky was cut open. It was shocking. In the next moment, a rain of blood fell from the crack in the sky. It was as if the heavens were crying, paying tribute to the souls buried under Taishan Peak. This shocking scene had never been seen before. Everyone within a million miles looked at the sky in shock. What had happened? All over the god world, pairs of aged eyes opened. The gods and demons who had once shocked the world were awakened by this powerful sword might. They praised it endlessly. That young man from Tai Peak had become so powerful now. In front of Taishan Peak, the Tai Peak master was bathed in blood. His white robes were dyed red, and a blazing battle intent rose like a divine sun. It was so dazzling that no one dared to look directly at him. Old ancestor Taishuan's expression darkened. He gathered energy in his palms, and divine energy surged. Thousands of souls roared out from the surging divine power. They were the many disciples that he had personally killed over the past hundreds of thousands of years. "Help me on a journey," old ancestor Taishin said. He controlled the souls as swords. Thousands of souls roared angrily. When he was alive, he had been famous. After he died, he had been refined into a sword soul, consigned to eternal damnation. Thousands of souls with shocking sword intent circled around old ancestor Taishin like ghosts. It was so terrifying that it made people tremble. In the distance, Fei Yu saw this scene and could not help but tremble. If the Tai Peak master had not acted today, would he have become one of these souls in the future? On the side, a cold look flashed through Ning Chen's eyes. This old ancestor Taishin was truly ruthless. He had refined the souls of his disciples into sword souls for him to use. It was the first time he had seen such a vicious method. It seemed that he had underestimated old ancestor Taishuan's viciousness. "Brother Ning, can you help the Tai Peak master?" Fei Yu looked over at the man beside him and pleaded. "This is a family matter of the 10,000 Swords Peak. I cannot interfere." Ningchen shook his head lightly and said, "The Peak Master of Tai Peak wouldn't ask for my help either. Trust him. Evil will never prevail over good. The Peak Master of Tai Peak sword is stronger than you can imagine." As he spoke, in front of Tai Shen Peak, thousands of swords transformed into swords and flew out. Using the souls of living beings to refine swords, their power increased by hundreds and thousands of times. It was hard to describe. Layers of sword light rose in front of the Tai Peak master, blocking the sword spirit. However, it only lasted for a few breaths before the sword light was dispersed. The sword spirit tore through the air and slashed towards the Tai Peak master. Ugh! With a muffled groan, the Tai Peak master took a few more steps back. Fresh blood splattered all over his body. With a clanging sound, the Tai divine sword stabbed into the ground. Fresh blood flowed down the blade and dyed the ground red. Thousands of sword souls appeared, and the battle was completely tilted. Old ancestor Tai Xian displayed a terrifying ability, controlling souls as swords to kill all enemies in the world. After the shocking battle, the Tai Peak master was heavily injured. His white robe was already stained with blood. Blood rain continued to fall from the sky, washing the peaks over and over again, but it was unable to wash away the ugliness in the hearts of people. Old ancestor Tai Xian, who was comparable to gods and demons, had already cultivated to the divine realm. Even though his qi and blood had withered and he was no longer at his peak, his combat ability was still shocking. In the distance, the peak masters who were watching the battle became nervous. Tai's actions were too bold. How could they compare to the old ancestor's ability? In front of Taishin Peak, the Tai Peak master, who was heavily injured but still had a strong desire to fight, stood up. He pulled out the Tai divine sword and stepped forward. The divine sword slashed down, shaking the thousands of sword souls. With a loud bang, the Tai Peak master flew out again, blood splattering all over the peaks. "Are you out of strength? Where did your bold words go?" Old ancestor Tai Xian snorted coldly and mocked. The Tai Peak master looked at the peaks in front of him, fatigue flashing in his eyes. For the first time in 10,000 years, he smiled. Under the rain of blood, the peaks of the 10,000 Swords Mountain were dyed red. It was a shocking sight. "Old ancestor, please be at ease and transform." The Tai Peak master raised his sword, and his sword will shot up to the 9 levels of heaven. The Tai Peak master replied to the other peaks. Boom! Thunder fell from the 9 heavens, and the dazzling lightning lit up the dark world. Under the lightning, the Tai Peak master let out a long cry, and his consciousness spread out, activating the last sword. Everything that is stained by my blood is my sword. I will destroy evil, and I will have no regrets. He was determined to cut sins, and all his cultivation turned into one sword. At this moment, more than 9,000 sword peaks in the 10,000 Swords mountain rumbled. Huge rocks rolled down, and dust rose up for thousands of miles. It was like the end of the world. This is... In the distance, the peak masters were extremely shocked when they saw this shocking scene. Everyone's attention was fixed on the 10,000 Swords mountain. Numerous blood-stained sword peaks rose from the ground and transformed into evil-slaying divine swords that shot into the clouds. In the void, tens of thousands of swords floated up and down. With the tens of thousands of peaks as swords, the Tai Peak Master displayed the final sword of cutting sins. The scene of the end of the world was shocking. On the last peak, Taishan Peak shook. It was pulled by the tens of thousands of peaks and showed signs of breaking away from old ancestor Tai Xian's control. Even you want to betray me? Old ancestor Tai Xian shouted angrily. Tai Xian Peak shook violently. The ancient sword spirit hissed softly, not knowing what to say. In the distance, Ning Chen heard the sound from the sword and sighed softly. Swords had spirits after all. They were not inanimate objects. Boom. Finally, under the call of the tens of thousands of swords, Taishan Peak broke free and shot into the 9 heavens. The tens of thousands of swords appeared in the sky together. They were extremely powerful, surpassing the boundary between gods and demons. The pressure made all living beings in the deity world tremble. Below, old ancestor Tai Xian looked at the scene in the sky, and his expression finally changed. The Tai Peak Master stepped forward and entered the void. With the last of his strength, he led the tens of thousands of swords into the world. Instantly, the tens of thousands of swords descended. The divine punishment of doomsday slashed toward the sinful old ancestor Tai Xian. Under the tens of thousands of swords, old ancestor Tai Xian raised his divine energy. Divine fire spread out and forcibly melted the thousands of sword spirits into one. Amidst the shrill cries, the thousands of sword spirits quickly gathered and turned into a blood-red and dazzling divine sword. Ha! Old ancestor Tai Xian shouted angrily. He held the sword and rushed into the 9 heavens. Boom! 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 There was an earth-shattering collision. Layers of sword peaks collapsed. The blood-red divine sword was invincible. The tens of thousands of peaks collapsed one after another, unable to withstand the power of gods and demons. In the void, the last peak fell and collided with the blood-red divine sword. In the intense collision, the Taishan divine peak collapsed, and an ancient divine sword appeared. The two divine weapons clashed with each other. The remaining force was vast and destructive. Crack! Suddenly, there was a slight cracking sound. After enduring the impact of the tens of thousands of peaks, the blood-red divine sword in old ancestor Tai Xian's hand finally could not withstand it. It was full of cracks. After a moment, with a bang, the blood-red sword shattered. The Taishan ancient sword's momentum did not stop. It pierced into old ancestor Tai Xian's chest. Bang! Old ancestor Tai Xian fell to the ground. He staggered a few steps and vomited. In front of his chest, the Taishan ancient sword pierced through his heart meridian and destroyed his martial bones. In the void, the Tai Peak Master descended from the void. He looked at old ancestor Tai Xian and said respectfully, "Your disciple, Tai, respectfully invites old ancestor Tai Xian to die in peace." The final farewell was respectful and sincere. The Tai Peak Master bowed and sent old ancestor Tai Xian off. "You!" Old ancestor Tai Xian groaned and staggered again. His cultivation was destroyed. Finally, he could not escape the punishment of time. Old ancestor Tai Xian, who had been at death's door for 100,000 years, quickly turned to dust. The heavenly way's reincarnation would not show mercy to anyone. In the distance, Ning Chen looked at this scene and sighed. This trip was worth it. The Tai Peak Master stood quietly on the ground of the various peaks that were riddled with holes. Suddenly, blood burst out from his body and dyed the sky red. Tai! The Peak Masters recovered from their shock. They wanted to go forward but were stopped. From today onwards, I am no longer the Tai Peak Master. My name is Jiang Taibai. The Tai Peak Master said tiredly. He stabbed the Tai Divine Sword into the ground and turned to leave. Chapter 1357. The 10,000 Swords Mountain was in a state of desolation. 10,000 sword peaks had been destroyed, and its foundation of tens of thousands of years had vanished into thin air. In order to return the last bit of justice to the world, the Tai Peak Master, Jiang Taibai, borrowed the Sword of Heaven and Earth to kill Old Ancestor Tai Xian. This battle shocked the world. Old Ancestor Tai Xian, who was comparable to an ancient god and demon, transformed into the Tao and ended his evil life. Jiang Taibai left and stepped down from his position as Tai Peak's Peak Lord. From then on, he had nothing to do with the 10,000 Swords Mountain. After the battle at Tai Xian Peak, the three words Jiang Taibai spread throughout the southern border of the god realm. A peerless expert who could kill gods and devils, even in the god realm, could be counted on one's fingers. After admiring this soul-stirring battle, Ning Chen also left the 10,000 Swords Mountain. He had met Jiang Taibai, who could borrow the Heaven and Earth Sword, so this trip had not been in vain. In the end, Fei Yu still chose to stay at Tai Xian Peak. As for why, perhaps only he himself knew. Ning Chen didn't say anything more. Everyone's path was their own choice. Regardless of whether it was right or wrong, outsiders had no right to interfere. After leaving the 10,000 Swords Peak, Ning Chen continued to travel north in search of an opportunity to attain the Sovereign Tao. On the path of cultivation, one would be able to step into the fourth level by mastering a law of heaven and earth. If one wanted to attain the Sovereign Tao, they would have to create their own small world. Ning Chen's three bodies all cultivated the way of the sword, and they were already able to open up their own small worlds. However, in the 1,000 years in the human world, the three bodies never had the chance to gather together, and they lost the best chance to prove their Tao. If the path of the Sovereign Tao was not completed, how could it be recognized by the Great Tao? Perhaps there was a way to completely give up on the demon body and let the Earth soul return to the main body. With the main body at the peak of the spring and autumn period and the phoenix body, he could break through the shackles of the sovereign realm. There was a 90% chance that he could break through to the sovereign realm. However, if he made such a choice, he would no longer have a devil body in the knowing destiny state. Ning Chen didn't make this choice, because he wouldn't abandon the demonic body. It was just like when the phoenix body and main body were at their weakest, the demonic body didn't devour them and used the demonic Tao. There was no end to the sword path, but there was a flaw in the human body. Before the sovereign path, Ning Chen had obtained the way but could not enter it. He felt somewhat helpless. Hundreds of thousands of miles away, there was an ancient city named Wei. The people in the city lived in peace and contentment, rarely fighting. It was rumored that in ancient times, there was a powerful fiend god that had transformed into the Tao. Therefore, the cultivators who came here were all suppressed. Ning Chen had heard many legends along the way. There were many Tao cultivators in the city of Wei who were like him, trapped by various reasons and unable to attain their Tao. There was even a rumor that the city of Wei once had a powerful fiend god that transformed into the Tao. The power of the laws was extremely powerful. If one was fated to obtain the inheritance of the fiend god, their future would be limitless. However, legends would always be legends. For thousands of years, countless people had gone to the city of Wei to seek enlightenment, but no one had ever heard of anyone obtaining the inheritance of a demon god. Ning Chen entered the city and looked around for a place to stay. However, after walking through half of the city, there was not a single inn. It seemed that the people in the city did not do business, or at least, they did not do business where people stayed. In the city, it was drizzling and the sky was getting dark. Ning Chen was walking on the street. His plain clothes were wet and he looked a little embarrassed. Walking into the city of Wei, even the cultivation of a powerful martial artist would be greatly suppressed. Although it was not to the extent of becoming an ordinary person, there was not much difference. The mysterious ancient city was filled with an ancient fragrance. It was like an ink painting, making people unable to bear to disturb its tranquility. After walking for a long time, Ning Chen felt a little tired. He stood under the eaves of an old house to take shelter from the rain. At this moment, the door creaked open and a young man in green walked out. "Come in and take shelter from the rain," the young man in green said calmly. Hearing this, Ning Chen turned around and looked at the young man in green in front of the door. At first, he was startled, but then he nodded gently. "Thank you." Ning Chen stepped into the house. In the house, there was only one oil lamp that lit up the dim room. "Sit anywhere. I'll pour you a cup of tea to warm you up," the young man in green said with a smile. He then walked to the stove and poured a cup of tea. Ning Chen walked to the table and sat down. Looking at the ancient and simple furnishings in the house, he felt inexplicably relaxed. "Come, drink a cup of tea to get rid of the cold. You were drenched in the rain just now. It's easy to get sick," the young man in green said softly. "Thank you." Ning Chen took the hot tea and drank a mouthful. As the hot air entered his stomach, it immediately spread throughout his body. He suddenly felt much less tired. "Good tea," Ning Chen praised from the bottom of his heart. How many years had it been since he last drank such good tea? "You know tea?" The young man in green smiled. "I know a little," Ning Chen replied. "I've studied this tea for 1,000 years," the young man in green said softly. Hearing this, Ning Chen looked at the tea in his hand and said, "The way of tea?" The young man in green nodded. "Tea can also enter the way?" Ning Chen asked in surprise. "Why not?" the young man in green asked. Ning Chen was slightly startled. "That's right. There were 3,000 great das. Why couldn't the way of tea enter the way? I see that you have been through a lot. You should be cultivating a way of killing, right?" The young man in green smiled. "The way of the sword," Ning Chen said truthfully. "The way of the sword?" A few days ago, in the direction of the 10,000 Swords Mountain, the might of the 10,000 Swords Mountain's 10,000 swords slaying gods and demons was indeed praiseworthy. If you are fortunate enough to witness it, perhaps you will be able to gain quite a bit. "I was at the 10,000 Swords Mountain at that time," Ning Chen replied. "That's really lucky," the young man in green sighed. "It's a blessing to have like-minded people on the path of cultivation." "Your way is not complete?" Ning Chen asked. "I don't know." The young man in green shook his head and said, "I haven't left the city for 1,000 years. I almost forgot that I'm still a cultivator." "Why don't you go out to verify it?" Ning Chen was puzzled. The laws of heaven and earth in the ancient city were greatly suppressed. As long as one did not leave the city, one could not verify their way. This person had not left the city for 1,000 years. It was really unbelievable. "It doesn't matter to me whether I verify my way or not." The young man in green smiled and said, "I'm already used to the peace here. If I go out, I might not be used to it." Ning Chen nodded thoughtfully. After a long time, he looked up at the person in front of him and said, "Are all the people here to comprehend the way?" "Some," the young man in green replied. "The blacksmith next door was once an executioner who killed without batting an eyelid. The teacher opposite seemed to be an imperial advisor of a divine dynasty. There are also some people whose identities are unknown. I don't know how long they have lived in the city. However, most of the people in the city are still ordinary people. It's really a magical place." Ning Chen sighed. Even though the laws of heaven and earth here suppressed the cultivator's cultivation, in such a magical place, there was really no fighting. It was really unbelievable. The young man in green seemed to see the doubt in Ning Chen's heart and said softly, "Because in everyone's heart, they still hope for peace." Ning Chen's eyes shook and he sighed in his heart. Maybe people's hearts were kind. This world needed a paradise. The city of Wei was entrusted with people's yearning for beautiful things. "Is there a problem with your way?" the young man in green asked. "Yes." Ning Chen nodded and said, "It's a dead end. I can't go through it. I only know how to make tea. I don't know much about killing. The blacksmith next door may be able to help you. The teacher opposite is very knowledgeable. He may be able to give you some advice," the young man in green said. Ning Chen looked sideways at the lights outside the window and said, "It's a bit late today. Let's do it tomorrow. Where can I find a place to stay?" Long-term or just a few days? The young man in green asked. Ningchen thought about it and said, maybe I'll stay for a year or so. There's an empty house next door. It was left behind by an old drunkard. You can stay there temporarily, the young man in green said. What about the owner of the house? Ningchen asked. His life was over. He died 2 years ago, the young man in green replied. I'm sorry, Ningchen said apologetically. It's okay. The young man in green shook his head and smiled. That old drunkard had lived long enough. In his words, you get tired of everything after a long time. It's the same even if you're alive. A strange person, Ningchen said. In this world, there were countless people who would do anything in order to live forever. How many of them could really see through the dead and the living? After a few words of greeting, Ningchen stood up and said, It's getting late. I won't disturb you. I'll go first. The young man in green nodded and said, Go out and turn left. Walk 100 steps and you'll be there. The door is not locked. The things inside are quite complete. You can go in and tidy up a little. Thank you. Ningchen expressed his gratitude again. Then he walked out of the room. Outside, the pitter-patter of the cold rain had gradually become lighter. Ningchen went out and turned left. 100 steps away, in front of a small wooden house, Ningchen stopped, pushed open the door and walked in. The house was quite clean. It was obvious that someone would come to clean it on a daily basis. Ningchen took out a match and lit an oil lamp to observe the whole house. The layout of the house was very simple. There was a small bed, a wooden table, and a stove that hadn't been lit for a long time. Next to the stove, there was some charcoal. Ningchen thought for a while and didn't light a fire. Night fell and the weather was slightly cold. There was a knock on the door. Ningchen was startled and immediately went to open the door. Outside the door, a beautiful woman stood in the cold rain. Her face was pale from the cold and she looked very pitiful. Can I go in and take shelter from the rain? The woman asked softly. Ningchen laughed and said, Come in. The woman entered the house and was slightly stunned when she saw the bare walls. Actually, I just came here. The owner of the house has passed away. I'm here to stay the night, Ningchen explained. I'm Yunmani. What's your name? The woman asked softly. Ningchen. Young Master Ning. Yunmani said softly, It's a little cold. Can I start a fire? Ningchen looked at the stove not far away and said, I thought about it just now, but I was lazy and thought of doing it tomorrow. I've embarrassed myself in front of Miss Yun. After saying that, Ningchen walked to the stove and picked up some dry wood to start a fire. All right, Miss Yun's name sounds familiar. In front of the stove, Ningchen started a fire and looked back at the woman behind him. Young master, are you talking about my name? Hearing this, Yunmani smiled and said, There's a heavenly lady under Empress Shui Yun in the north. Her name is also Yunmani. It's just a coincidence. Chapter 1358. Weiqing City, a simple wooden house. Inside the wooden house, a fire danced, driving away the coldness of the night. The two who came from afar, perhaps coincidentally met in Weiqing City, so they temporarily hid in the wooden house to avoid the cold and rain. There was only one bed in the house. Without a doubt, tonight would be another sleepless night, at least for Ningchen. Most of the time, Ningchen still had the demeanor of a gentleman, especially when facing a seemingly weak girl. Perhaps she was tired. Yunmani leaned against the headboard and fell asleep not long after. Ningchen stood in front of the window, looking at the drizzle outside. He gradually became absent-minded. It was not his wish to come to the divine world, because once he came, it would be difficult to return. However, he had no choice but to come. Wuyu Heaven. It seemed like a simple name, but from the moon god's fearful attitude, this Wuyu Heaven was extraordinarily strong. If he wanted to take back Xnyu's soul, he had to become stronger. This ancient city was full of mysteries. Any teacher or blacksmith he met could be a peerless expert whose name shook the world. It was not easy to comprehend the Tao. The people here might have stayed in the city for thousands of years, or even longer. There was indeed a problem with his Tao. If he did not give up the demon body, he would not be able to step onto the sovereign Tao in a short period of time. The problem of not being able to have both the fish and the bear's paw made his heart uneasy. He knew that this was not a good thing. If his Tao heart was not stable, there would be problems with his sword. However, knowing and doing were two different things. While he was thinking, the long and cold night gradually passed in the ancient city. In the east, when the sky was about to brighten, the rain stopped. However, the sky in Weiqing City was still not clear. Dark clouds covered the sky, as if it would rain again at any time. The door was pushed open with a squeak. Ningchen walked out and looked at the dim city. He thought for a while and decided to make a paper umbrella for himself. In the small city, resources were scarce, there were very few businesses, most of the people were self-sufficient. This strange small city did not fit in with the outside world. Ningchen searched in front of the door for a long time. He found a piece of wood and bamboo. Perhaps it had been too long, the wood had already decayed. Fortunately, the bamboo was still tough enough to make an umbrella. Ningchen took out a small knife, sat in front of the door and began to cut the wood. Not long after, the umbrella frame was roughly formed. Ningchen fixed the bamboo that was cut and then stood up to look for oil paper or something that could replace it. "Young master, what are you looking for?" At some point in time, Yun Mandan stood quietly in front of the door and asked, "Oil paper. I want to make an umbrella." Ningchen casually replied. Yun Mandan looked around and said, "There doesn't seem to be any here. I'll go next door and borrow one." After speaking, Yun Mandan turned around and walked towards the blacksmith shop next door. Not long after, Yun Mandan walked back with a piece of paper in her hand and handed it to the former. "Miss, you're smart." Ningchen took the oil paper and praised with a smile. Yun Mandan chuckled and quietly watched from the side without saying anything. Ningchen sat in front of the door and carefully wrapped the oil paper around the umbrella. For the first time in 1,000 years, Ningchen made an umbrella with his own hands. Looking at the oiled paper umbrella that was gradually taking shape in his hands, a sense of accomplishment rose in his heart. At the side, Yun Mandan secretly chuckled. Clearly, she did not agree with the appearance of the oil paper umbrella that someone had made. "What's wrong? Don't I look good?" Ningchen sensed something and turned around to ask. He felt that it was all right. "Not bad." Yun Mani smiled. "I think so too." Ningchen stood up and looked at the sky that could rain at any time. After thinking for a while, he handed the oiled paper umbrella to the woman in front of him and said, "Here, you can use it when it rains." "No need, no need." Yun Mandan hurriedly waved her hand and refused, saying, "I don't like to go out. I don't need this umbrella. Young Master Ning, you can use it yourself." Ningchen looked at the umbrella in his hand regretfully and asked again, "You really don't need it?" "Really?" Yun Mandan nodded affirmatively. "All right." Ningchen put away the umbrella and smiled. "Oh right, Miss Yun, I haven't had the time to ask you. Why did you come to Weiqing City?" "To comprehend the Tao." Yun Mandan answered matter-of-factly. Ningchen looked at the woman in front of him with some surprise and said, "Miss, are you also here to comprehend the Tao? Why can't you tell?" Yun Mandan chuckled. "That's not it." Ningchen smiled and said, "It's just that you have a calm temperament and don't seem like someone who is confused about the Tao." "Maybe I'm pretending?" Yun Mandan laughed. "That girl's acting ability is too shocking." Ningchen sighed. "All right, let's not talk about me. What about you? Why did you come here?" Yun Mandan asked softly. "My Tao heart is unstable, so I came to find a solution." Ningchen said bluntly, "Since you know that your Tao heart is unstable, why don't you calm your heart and stabilize it? Why did you come here from so far away?" Yun Mandan asked. "Miss, your words always make people speechless." Ningchen said helplessly. "Am I wrong?" Yun Mandan laughed. "Maybe." Ningchen said softly, "I just stayed in one place for too long and couldn't find a solution after thinking for many years, so I came here to try my luck." "You're the same as the uncle next door. He thought the same 900 years ago." Yun Mandan pointed at the blacksmith shop not far away and said, "However, he doesn't seem to have thought it through yet." Ningchen chuckled and said, "Miss Yun, has anyone ever told you that you're really different from the rest?" When they met yesterday, the woman in front of him gave him the impression that she was delicate and gentle. After talking with her today, he realized that the first impression could be deceiving. Yun Mandan smiled sweetly and said, "Naturally, someone has said that. In my opinion, you're also different from the rest." Ningchen smiled and didn't say anything else. This woman wasn't simple. While the two were talking, the door opposite them creaked open and a middle-aged man walked out. He was dressed in a white scholar's robe and held a bamboo scroll in his hand. At a glance, one could tell that he was a scholar. Ningchen looked over and saw the person. A strange look flashed in his eyes. This should be the teacher that the young man mentioned yesterday. Opposite them, the teacher saw the two people in front of him and nodded. Ningchen returned the greeting with a kind smile on his face. "You came yesterday?" the teacher asked. Ningchen nodded. The teacher looked at the woman beside him and asked, "Wife?" Ningchen smiled and said, "It's a coincidence. We're friends now." The teacher nodded and said, "I'll go give a lecture first. We'll talk when I come back." "Please." Ningchen said politely. The teacher nodded politely and walked away. Ding. Dang. Ding. At this moment, the sound of iron striking came from the blacksmith shop next door. It was monotonous and ear-piercing. As the sound of iron striking came from the blacksmith shop, the entire small town started to come alive. Everyone was doing their own jobs. Some were teaching, some were farming, and some were treating. No one was interfering with each other. Ningchen stood in front of the house and looked at the small town. His state of mind gradually calmed down. Next door, a woman walked out with the completed farming tools and placed them in front of the house, waiting for the buyer. In the house, the fire jumped. A bare-armed man was holding a hammer and striking the iron in his hand. He didn't seem tired at all. The woman placed the tools and was about to enter the house when she saw the two people not far away. She showed a friendly smile and said, "You haven't eaten breakfast yet, right? Come with me. I just made some extra." Ning Chen and Yun Mani looked at each other. At this moment, they both felt a little hungry. The blacksmith shop was very simple. When the two came in, the man was still working. The woman placed the bowls and chopsticks and looked at the two. She smiled and said, "Sit down and eat. I left some food for your big brother. He will be able to eat later." Ning Chen and Yun Mani sat down embarrassedly. Looking at the simple dishes on the table, their stomachs were rumbling. This magical small town always made people forget that they were martial artists. "Eat, don't be shy." The woman sat down and picked some food for the two. She said with a gentle expression, "There aren't many rules here, so I will eat at the same table as you. I hope you don't mind." "Sister, what are you talking about? We are the ones disturbing you." Yun Mani said with a bright smile on her face. "This child is not only beautiful, but also has a sweet mouth." The woman smiled from ear to ear and was in a very good mood as she said, "Elder sister for life." Ning Chen secretly gave the woman beside him a thumbs up. He felt that his bootlicking skills were good enough. He didn't expect that there would always be someone stronger. There was always a mountain higher than the one before. Women always cared about their age the most. Anyway, he couldn't bring himself to call Miss Yun sister. Not far away, the man grinned. He looked very simple. Seeing the man smile, a strange expression flashed across Ning Chen's face. If it wasn't for the fact that the young man in green who entered the Dao with tea told him that this blacksmith used to be an executioner who killed without blinking an eye, he would have believed that this was an honest and simple man. The dishes were simple, but the taste was not bad. When Ning Chen and Yun Mani were almost full, the man finished his work and sat at the table to eat. "Brotherly, thank you for your hospitality," Yun Mani said with a smile. "It's my pleasure." The man replied honestly and said with a smile, "Listening to your conversation, you should all be martial artists. But is your cultivation path not smooth?" "I'm fine. I was just curious, so I came to play. The young master beside me is probably not going well," Yun Mani said with a smile. Ning Chen smiled bitterly. This girl's mouth was really poisonous. "You cultivate the sword?" The man looked over and asked. Ning Chen nodded. "The slaughter sword Dao?" The man asked again. Ning Chen nodded again. The man was silent for a long time. Then he said, cultivating the Tao through slaughter will lead to sin. In the future, every step will be difficult and dangerous. I advise you to cultivate another Tao. It's too late. Ningchen sighed. I still have important things to do. I don't have time to cultivate another Tao. The sword can be a gentleman's sword or a weapon of slaughter. I'm not asking you to completely give up the sword Tao. I'm just asking you to make some changes in the sword Tao. The man said seriously. Ningchen pondered for a moment. In the end, he shook his head and said, "It's too late." The man sighed and said, "Since you can't change it, then kill your way out. There's no need to worry too much about the right and wrong in the world." Chapter 1359. Weiqing City, rainy, blacksmith shop. Ning Chen and the blacksmith talked for a long time. On the path of Tao, they had different views. Since they were fated to meet today, they both expressed their views. The woman listened quietly at the side, not saying a word. For more than 10 years, her man would only be less stiff when he met someone who shared the same interests. It seemed that this young man had a temper with him. A simple breakfast lasted for 2 hours. Most of the time, the woman and Yun Mandan didn't say a word as they listened to the two talk. The blacksmith's understanding of Tao benefited Ning Chen a lot. In this world, the longer one lived, the more they would see. The blacksmith had lived for thousands of years and had seen many things. After 2 hours of simple Tao discussion at the dining table, Ning Chen gained a clearer understanding of the vastness of the world. All right, I'm just a blacksmith now. I've almost forgotten about cultivation. There's an old-fashioned bookworm on the opposite side. Perhaps you can ask him. The blacksmith suggested. Thank you for your advice. Ning Chen said politely. The woman cleared the table and the blacksmith continued to work on the farm tools. Ning Chen and Yun Mandan left. Your fallacious reasoning won't lead others astray, right? The woman said worriedly. How could it be fallacious reasoning? When it was only his wife, the blacksmith complained honestly, although this young man's talent is average, he's extremely smart. He can judge what's right and what's wrong. That girl is not bad too. The woman didn't forget to add. That girl? The blacksmith smiled and didn't say anything else. In his opinion, that girl wasn't simple. If they really fought, there weren't many people in the city who could beat her, including the young man beside her. Next door to the blacksmith shop, the two returned. Yun Mandan stopped and looked at the simple and small wooden house in front of her. She said, I want to stay in the city for a while. On the side, Ning Chen was thinking about his conversation with the blacksmith and didn't care. I said, I want to stay in the city for a while. Yun Mandan said with some dissatisfaction. Ning Chen nodded and replied casually. Yun Mandan's eyes were burning with anger. She said, Where do I live? Ning Chen came back to his senses and looked at the woman who couldn't hold back her anger. He smiled apologetically, Miss Yun, I'll find another place. That won't be necessary. The flames in Yun Mandan's eyes disappeared, and a bright smile appeared on her face as she said, Help me build a small house next to it. Ning Chen thought for a moment and nodded lightly. All right. I'll help you. Yun Manxia smiled. All right. Ning Chen nodded again. The smile on Yun Mandan's face became even brighter. With the goal set, the two of them immediately started to build the house. Ning Chen went to look for wood, and Yun Mandan was responsible for looking for scattered construction tools. After all, a woman's heart was more meticulous than a man's. The two had a clear division of labor and worked together. After coming to the city of Wei, Ning Chen seemed to have become much kinder, and the sharpness on his body was no longer as piercing. In the past, no matter how much of a gentleman Ning Chen was, he wouldn't have bothered with Yun Mandan's seemingly excessive request. In half a day, Ning Chen carried one log after another from outside the city. When the people in the city saw this, they would enthusiastically ask him if he needed any help. The town was not big, but the people were very friendly. Ning Chen responded to them with a smile and a good attitude. In the blacksmith shop, the woman looked at the young men who were carrying firewood. She turned around and said, They seem to be building a house. Clang, clang. The blacksmith continued to strike the hot iron in front of him and said, "Later you go over and see if there's anything you can help with. They just came to the city of Wei and are unfamiliar with the place. We should help them." Yes, sir. The woman nodded and replied. After a busy day, when the sun was setting, the teacher came back from the opposite side. Seeing the scene in front of him, he asked in surprise, "Old blacksmith, what are they doing?" "Building a house." In the blacksmith shop, the blacksmith who was about to finish his work looked up and casually replied, "Living here for a long time?" The teacher asked in surprise. "Should be." The blacksmith nodded. "Then there's another neighbor," the teacher said softly, then turned around and went back into the house. "Old-fashioned bookworm," the blacksmith said calmly. The woman heard this and smiled lightly. These two people actually despised each other. In the west, the sun had set and the town was gradually getting dark. After a busy day, the two people could finally take a breather. "I want to take a bath. You go outside and wait for a while." Yun Mandan looked at the man in front of her and said. Ning Chen was startled. He immediately stood up and walked out of the house. "Don't peek," Yun Mandan warned worriedly. Ning Chen nodded helplessly and said, "Don't worry, I won't." After saying this, Ning Chen walked out of the house and closed the door. Yun Mandan looked at the door in disbelief. After confirming that there was no gap, she was relieved. The night in the town was very quiet. Ning Chen stood outside and looked at the night sky without moonlight. His state of mind gradually calmed down. "Where's Miss Yun?" At this moment, a young man in green walked out of the house next door. When he saw Ning Chen 100 steps away, he asked in surprise. "Taking a bath?" Ning Chen replied. "You two are really faded." The young man in green sighed. Ning Chen smiled and said, "It's not that we're faded. We're in the same boat. Miss Yun is much more carefree than you." The young man in green smiled. "I can't guess the thoughts of a woman." Ning Chen smiled and said, "How come you have time to come out for a breather tonight? It's boring to always make tea." The young man in green said. "Shouldn't you never be tired of your own path?" Ning Chen asked. "Who said so?" The young man in green smiled and said, "Even those who seek the path can't do the same thing forever. Otherwise, it would be too sad to ignore the beautiful scenery in the world." "That makes sense." Ning Chen nodded. "Don't you peek?" The young man in green suddenly asked. Ning Chen was startled at first. Then he laughed and said, "You have such a hobby?" "I did it when I was young." The young man in green didn't hide it. He smiled and said, "It's a waste if I'm not romantic. Now that I'm older, I seem to be more honest. I think I did it when I was young." Ning Chen thought and said, "I even had a nosebleed at that time." "Huh." The young man in green laughed and said, "How long have you lived?" 1,000 years. Ning Chen replied. "I've lived for 3,000 years. The young man in green said arrogantly. "Then I should respectfully call you senior." Ning Chen turned around and bowed with a smile. "Don't do that." The young man in green smiled and said, "Senior, it's the generation that died before me. I haven't lived long enough." Ning Chen chuckled. He hadn't lived long enough either. Therefore, he had to work hard to live on. "How about peeking?" The young man in green changed the topic and said seriously. Ning Chen looked back at the house behind him and said awkwardly, "I don't think that's a good idea. I already promised Miss Yun that I wouldn't peek." "So what if you promised?" "I don't believe that you've never broken a promise in your life." The young man in green mocked. At this moment, the door of the blacksmith shop opened between the two of them. The woman came out with a basin of water and poured it. She looked at the young man in green with an unfriendly gaze and said, "Tea maker, can't you learn something better?" "Ah, Sister Lee, it's so late and you're still awake. I was just joking with this little brother," the young man in green said embarrassedly. The woman looked away worriedly and looked at Ning Chen. She said, "Little brother Ning, don't learn from this old man." "Sister Lee, don't worry. I won't do anything stupid," Ning Chen replied with a smile. Only then did the woman feel relieved and returned to the house. Before she closed the door, she glared at the young man in green. Ning Chen pointed at the blacksmith shop helplessly and shook his head. The young man in green didn't give up. He walked past the blacksmith shop cautiously and said softly, "It's okay. Let's hurry up. Otherwise, Miss Yun will come out. We were talking so loudly just now. I think Miss Yun heard us." Ning Chen resisted. "How can a grown man like you be so slow?" The young man in green was very angry. He dragged Ning Chen and walked towards the wooden house behind. In the small house, the lights were flickering. In the house, steam was rising. In the midst of the steam, a beautiful silhouette was gently wiping her body. Her black hair was hanging down, and her fair body was so alluring under the dim light. Chapter 1360. In the small house, a lady was bathing. Outside the house, the young man in green pulled Ning Chen in excitedly. After living for 1,000 years, his heart was like still water without any ripples. Tonight, on a whim, the young man in green pulled a scapegoat without hesitation. Together, they would do something that would result in their legs being broken. Ning Chen's face was full of reluctance. It was unknown if he was faking it or if he was really a gentleman. When the two of them reached the door, the young man in green carefully pushed the door. He wanted to open a crack but found that the door was blocked. "Miss Yun must be guarding against us. Why don't we stop peeping?" Ning Chen suggested. "It's okay. I've been to this house more than 100 times." The young man in green whispered and pulled Ning Chen to the back of the house. The back of the house was showing signs of decay due to years of disrepair. There were small cracks everywhere. The young man in green walked forward and gently pried open a piece of rotten wood. Suddenly, the light shone and a crack appeared. Seeing the light, the young man in green's eyes lit up. He looked at the person beside him and said, "You first?" Ning Chen was puzzled. "It's been too many years since I've done something so immoral. I'm a little nervous." The young man in green said matter-of-factly. Ning Chen was speechless. It was the first time he found out that this person was so shameless. "Quick, quick." The young man in green rubbed his hands and said nervously, "I'm not looking." Ning Chen rejected decisively and reminded him, "Be careful not to be discovered by Miss Yun. She'll break your legs." "What's there to be afraid of?" The young man in green said arrogantly, "If you don't want to look, then keep a lookout. Don't let Blacksmith Li's wife find out." After saying that, the young man in green lowered his head and prepared to peep nervously and excitedly. Ning Chen rubbed his nose lightly. Was he helping the evildoer? "What are you doing?" Right at this moment, a charming voice sounded from behind. "Shu, lower your voice." The young man in green trembled nervously and whispered softly. However, just as he finished speaking, the young man in green's body suddenly stiffened and he turned around in disbelief. "Miss Yun." The young man in green stuttered. "Oh, what is this senior who has lived for 3,000 years doing here?" Yun Manyao, who had just finished bathing, still had water droplets on her hair. She looked at the man in front of her with an abnormally bright smile. At the side, Ning Chen watched with schadenfreude, and he looked as if he was just short of stepping on him. "Young Master Ning, what are you doing here?" Yun Mandan shifted her gaze and said with a smile, "Can you tell me about it?" Sensing the dangerous gaze of the woman in front of him, the smile on Ning Chen's face immediately disappeared. "I was forcibly dragged here by this senior. I didn't do anything." In the face of self-preservation and loyalty, Ning Chen chose self-preservation without hesitation and pointed out the mastermind. "You traitor!" The young man in green immediately stomped his foot and said angrily after hearing this. "Oh, is that so?" The smile on Yun Mandan's face became brighter and brighter. Looking at the two of them, she said, "Not bad, peeping at a lady bathing in the middle of the night. Your Tao is really fresh and refined." The young man lowered his head in shame, not daring to refute. At the side, Ning Chen didn't dare to make a sound and accepted the criticism. The commotion behind the wooden house attracted the attention of the blacksmith couple next door and the teacher opposite. They walked out one after another. "Immoral, disrespectful as an old man," the teacher said indifferently and mocked. "Sigh." The blacksmith also sighed softly. Although he didn't say anything, he also didn't have a good expression. "Tea maker, don't you find it embarrassing? The woman went forward and pulled Yun Mandan's hand. She said with a gentle expression, Miss Yun didn't get taken advantage of by this old man, right? No, sister, don't worry. Yun Mandan smiled. Hearing this, the woman's expression became better. She looked at Ning Chen and said resentfully, Why did you do this kind of thing with this shameless old man? His mind is filthy. Yun Mandan said in a timely manner with a fake smile. Ning Chen shut his mouth and didn't quibble anymore to avoid making more mistakes. The woman sighed softly and said, A good young man like you couldn't learn from anyone. Why did you have to walk together with this tea maker? Ning Chen lowered his head and didn't say a word. At the side, the young man in green lowered his head even more. He didn't dare to refute. The denunciation meeting lasted for half an hour. If it wasn't for the cold night, the two sinners would probably drown in spit tonight. After half an hour, the blacksmith couple and the teacher went back. Yun Mandan also went back to her house and locked the door. Outside in the cold night, Ning Chen and the young man in green looked at each other awkwardly. Goodbye. The young man in green walked back to his room without any sense of loyalty, leaving a certain someone behind. Ning Chen looked at his back and gritted his teeth. He couldn't wait to kick him. Behind him, the lights in the house went out, leaving Ning Chen alone outside, homeless. The night wind blew. It was bone-chilling. Ning Chen's body trembled slightly. Even with his cultivation body, he could feel a trace of coldness. At this time, the door of the opposite house opened with a creak. The teacher walked out and said indifferently, Nowhere to go? Ning Chen nodded. Come over and sit? The teacher said. Thank you. Ning Chen nodded and walked forward. The teacher's house was bigger than the wooden house left by the old drunkard. The lights flickered, illuminating the dark house. The layout of the wooden house was very unique and simple. The most conspicuous thing in the house was a bookshelf. There were many ancient scrolls and bamboo slips on the bookshelf. Some of the bamboo slips were very old. The hemp rope on the bamboo slips was about to break. Here to comprehend the Tao? The teacher asked. Yes. Ning Chen nodded. What Tao are you cultivating? The teacher continued to ask. Sword Tao. Ning Chen replied. In the past 2 days, he had answered this question countless times. Then it is the slaughter sword Tao. This time, the teacher didn't ask again. He directly confirmed. How do you know? Ning Chen asked in surprise. I can see it. The teacher said calmly, the blood energy in your body may be concealed by your cultivation level outside, so it is not obvious. But in the city of Wei, everyone's cultivation level is suppressed, and a person's nature is more easily revealed. I can see that your heart is not bad, but the blood energy in your body is more intense than those evil people. Teacher, I admire your eyesight. Ning Chen said softly, May I know what Tao you are cultivating? The Confucian Tao. The teacher looked at the scrolls on the table and said, However, in recent years, the more I cultivate, the more I feel that I am shallow. The Confucian Tao is broad and profound. When I was young, I once knew a great master of the Confucian Tao. He was called the teacher by the world. Although his cultivation base was not as high as yours, his understanding of the Confucian Tao was unique in the world. Ning Chen said. Hearing this, the teacher's face turned serious and he asked, Is the teacher you're talking about still alive? Ning Chen shook his head and said, He died in battle to protect the world. The teacher's eyes flashed with regret. What a pity. I don't know much about the Confucian Tao. However, the teacher once said that the foundation of the Confucian Tao is actually only 4 words. The world. Ning Chen said seriously. The teacher's eyes lit up when he heard this. Then he sighed softly and said, I was once the imperial tutor of the divine dynasty. I also worked hard for the people of the divine dynasty. Later, I was framed. When I lost my power and was at my most desperate, it was the world that you mentioned that kicked me when I was down and forced me step by step into the abyss of no return. Ning Chen fell silent when he heard this. After a long time, he said, The world is ignorant and easy to be used by others. Is such an ignorant world still worth protecting? The teacher sneered. Ning Chen said calmly, Because we are the children of the world. The people we cherish are also the children of the world. If the world is at war, how can they be safe? After hearing the former's words, a strange look flashed across the teacher's face. He said, "If you are alone in the world, why do you care about the world being at war? If you are really alone in the world, the path of the Confucian Tao has come to an end. Teacher, why don't you change your path as soon as possible?" Ningchen said bluntly. The teacher's eyes darkened. He looked at the person in front of him as if he wanted to see through the former. Ningchen did not avoid his gaze. His expression was calm and firm. "It has been 1,000 years. You are the first person who dares to say this in front of me," the teacher said in a deep voice. "The Confucian Tao is the path of the world. Teacher, you should know it better than anyone." "You are just facing it again," Ningchen said seriously. The teacher sighed softly and said, "Perhaps the truth is as you said. I will also give you a suggestion for your slaughtering sword Tao. You can judge whether it is right or wrong." "I am all ears," Ningchen said seriously with a respectful expression. "In the slaughtering Tao, killing one is a sin. Killing 10,000 is a hero. If you kill 9 million, you are a hero among heroes. If you kill all the people in the world, you are the Tao." At this point, the teacher looked at the former with killing intent in his eyes. Chapter 1361. In the city of Wei, the sky had been cloudy for several days. Finally, it began to clear up. The sun shone down, dispelling the coldness of late autumn. After many days of hard work, a new wooden house was built next to the house left by the drunkard. It was simple and unique. In his free time, Ningchen would often find the blacksmith and the teacher to discuss the Tao. Of course, he would also occasionally go to the young man in green to drink tea. Although the old shameless man who had lived for 3,000 years had an ordinary character, he always had his own unique understanding of the Tao of cultivation. In the small city, there were many Tao cultivators. However, most of them hid their identities. Unless one was familiar with them, it would be difficult to recognize them. The blacksmith, the old shameless man, and the teacher had stayed in the city of Wei for more than 1,000 years. They were very familiar with each other, but they also disliked each other. Their Taos were different, so naturally, their temperaments and personalities were not very compatible. Appreciation for each other had never existed in the trivial matters of life. As for the peeping incident last time, it was unknown who intentionally or unintentionally spread it out, but gradually, the entire small city knew about it. As the instigator of the whole incident, the shameless old man had become the topic of conversation for people to scold him after a meal. Ningchen, as an accomplice, was also looked down upon by many people. Fortunately, the two of them were extraordinarily thick-skinned. No matter how others pointed at them, they smiled and did not get angry. As time passed, the people in the city felt bored and the incident was gradually forgotten. In the two houses, the two of them silently heaved a sigh of relief. They were very satisfied with the end of the incident. "Oh, young Master Ning, what happened these days? Why didn't you go out?" Outside the house, Yun Mandan appeared with a bright smile. Seeing the person, Ningchen felt inexplicably guilty. He smiled apologetically. "Miss Yun is here. Come in and sit." "I don't dare." Yun Mandan stood at the door, indifferent. She smiled and said, "If someone's beast nature is unleashed, wouldn't a weak woman like me be a lamb in a tiger's mouth?" Hearing this, Ningchen's smile froze. He laughed and said, "Miss Yun is joking. Let's go out for a walk?" Yun Mandan smiled slightly and did not say much on this topic. She looked at the clear sky of the small city and said. Ningchen thought for a moment and nodded. Deference is no substitute for obedience. In the small city, the sun shone brightly and people came and went. It was much more lively than usual. The two of them walked along the street, looking like a perfect match. However, when the people in the city saw the two of them, they sighed softly in their hearts. A fresh flower was stuck in the cow dung. As for who was the fresh flower and who was the cow dung, even a 3-year-old child in the city could tell. It seems that you still need to stay for a few more days before you can leave. Yun Mandan looked at the gazes of the people in the city and said with a smile, "Heh." Ning Chen grinned and didn't say another word on this topic. There weren't many pedestrians on the streets of the city, and the stalls were scattered about. This small, ancient city still retained its initial appearance of self-sufficiency. This place is truly a paradise. No wonder many of the people who come here to comprehend the Tao will never leave again. Yun Mandan looked at the children playing on the street and said with a kind smile on her charming face, "Yes." Ning Chen nodded. Humans were born with good natures. In the end, what changed people's hearts were mostly the temptations of the outside world. Here, such temptations did not exist. Hence, people's hearts were much cleaner. Have you ever thought of staying here forever? Speaking of this, Yun Mandan looked at the man beside her. A trace of undetectable anticipation flashed in the depths of her eyes. Hearing this, Ning Chen gently shook his head and said, "No." As expected, Yun Mandan sighed softly in her heart. She quickly collected her thoughts and said with a smile on her face, "You've been here for so long. What have you gained? I haven't seen you use your sword even once these days." "I've gained a lot, but it's not enough to prove my sword," Ning Chen said truthfully. Boom! At this moment, the entire small city suddenly shook. The people in the small city panicked and didn't know what was going on. In the private school, the teacher who was teaching frowned slightly. Looking at the panicked children in front of him, he said, "Don't panic. It's fine. Everyone, go to the open space outside first." After speaking, the teacher led the dozen or so children in the private school outside. Not far away, Blacksmith Lee and his wife ran out of the blacksmith shop. Looking outside, they couldn't hide their surprise. "Earthquake, earthquake." Next door, the young man in green also ran out with his head in his hands and shouted, "What are you panicking for?" The woman looked at the young man in green's embarrassing appearance and scolded, "Earthquake." The young man in green said matter-of-factly, "You're afraid of an earthquake?" The woman said angrily, "That's true." The young man in green straightened his back. He was a cultivator. Why would he be afraid of an earthquake? Boom! Just as he finished speaking, the ground below the small city shook again. Other than the blacksmith shop and Yun Mandan's wooden house, 3 old houses collapsed. In front of the blacksmith shop, Blacksmith Lee's mouth twitched slightly. He wanted to laugh but held it in. The young man in green looked back at the collapsed house behind him. His face was extremely ugly. On the streets of the small city, pedestrians rushed to the open space in a panic. Their faces were full of fear. "What happened?" Yun Mandan asked seriously. "It doesn't seem like a disaster happened nearby." Ning Chen looked into the distance. His expression was also solemn. He said, "There should be experts fighting. This city of Wei has the protection of divine magic. What kind of expert can affect this place?" Yun Mandan said, "Maybe it's a real divine demon." Ning Chen narrowed his eyes and said, "Let's go take a look." Yun Mandan suggested. Ning Chen thought for a while and nodded. "Let's go." With that, the two of them moved and rushed out of the small city. Outside the city, after the two of them left, they immediately felt the power of laws in their bodies disappear. Their cultivation quickly recovered. Without the protection of the divine demon laws, a shocking pressure spread from afar. It was violent and powerful, like the might of the heavens. What a terrifying power! Yun Mandan felt the pressure from afar. Her expression turned serious. When divine demons fight, mortals suffer. Ning Chen looked at the constantly shaking small city behind him. His eyes turned cold. He said, "Let's go and see who is fighting." In the next moment, the two of them rushed out and quickly went far away. Tens of thousands of miles away, the two auras kept colliding. In the void, dragons and tigers collided. The powerful airflow could destroy mountains and rocks. It was shocking. Below, the two of them stood quietly with their eyes closed. Their bodies were surrounded by dazzling light. They looked extraordinary. A battle of the Tao realm. In the distance, the two of them rushed over. Yun Mandan looked at the scene of the gods fighting and said slowly. Beside her, Ning Chen's eyes narrowed. He said, What is a battle of the Tao realm? It is to abandon the body and cultivation. Only the Tao realm is used to determine the winner. Yun Mandan said seriously, everyone has their own Tao. This kind of battle is even more dangerous. The loser will be seriously injured. The more serious one will die. Ningchen heard this and looked at the dragon and tiger that were fighting in the sky. His eyes narrowed slightly. This was novel. There were too few people who proved their Tao in the mortal world. It was impossible to see such a battle. Aren't they afraid of a sneak attack? Ningchen continued to ask. Someone has to have the guts to do so. Yun Mandan replied. If someone sneaks up on them, they will also be involved in this battle of the Tao realm. Unless the person's Tao can suppress them, there won't be any good results. Speaking of this, Yun Mandan looked at the person beside her. Her smile was dangerous. You can't be thinking about these two people, right? Ningchen smiled awkwardly and said, Miss Yun, you think too much. I have no enmity with them. Why would I do something so despicable? Despicable? Yun Mandan thoughtfully thought for a moment and said, Perhaps. However, if you really want to take advantage of these two people, can I help you? Hearing this, Ning Chen's eyes flashed. He said, Didn't you say that it is difficult for ordinary people to interfere in the battle of the Tao realm? Do you think I am an ordinary person? Yun Mandan said coldly. However, there is no need to rush. They will not fight here for no reason. They must have some unknown purpose. Ning Chen nodded and looked forward. Weiqing City was famous in the southern border of the God realm. No one would take the risk to fight here unless they had no other choice. Boom. In the void, the battle between the dragon and the tiger was becoming more and more intense. A moment of carelessness could lead to death in a battle between two god-fiend gods of the god world. The battle of the Tao realm was extremely dangerous. The dragon and tiger attacked each other. Below, cracks began to appear on the bodies of the two God Realm Almighties. Blood splattered everywhere. Suddenly, one of the God Realm Almighties opened his eyes. A dazzling light burst out from his eyes. A small silver sword flew out and slashed at the divine dragon in the sky. Mingwo Dao's slashing art. Seeing this, Yun Mandan was shocked and lost her voice. In that instant, the God Realm Almighty who used the forbidden technique had a murderous look in his eyes. After the small silver sword killed the divine dragon in the sky, it continued to fly forward. Let's go. Yun Mandan came back to her senses. She pulled the people beside her and fled toward Weiqing City. What happened? Ning Chen felt the fear in the eyes of the woman beside him and asked, Don't ask too much. Run quickly. Don't let that small silver sword get close to you. Otherwise, your life's hard work will be over. While speaking, Yun Mandan's movement technique became faster and faster. She was like a bolt of lightning as she fled with Ning Chen. The distance of tens of thousands of miles was just a short distance for cultivators. However, in front of the Mingwo Dao slashing art, a short distance was like the end of the world. In the blink of an eye, the small silver sword broke through the air behind them. It was 3 inches long and its body was crystal clear. It was extremely extraordinary. As the murderous intent approached, a long green silk appeared in Yun Mandan's hand. In an instant, the silk turned into a rainbow and blocked the Mingwo Dao slashing art. Rip. With a piercing sound of clothes tearing, the long green silk was shattered. It could not stop the forbidden weapon. Yun Mandan let out a muffled groan, and a trace of blood quietly slid down from her mouth. Seeing this, Ning Chen's expression turned serious. He grabbed Yun Mandan's arm. Phoenix flames rose behind his back and a pair of wings appeared. The phoenix spread its wings and flew at extreme speed. In an instant, it disappeared. The two of them flew into Weiqing City. The phoenix flames dissipated and were completely suppressed by the divine magic. Behind them, the God Realm Almighty walked forward. He looked at Weiqing City in front of him and frowned. Chapter 1362. In the city of Wei, Ning Chen and Yun Mani fled into the city. Behind them, the Almighty from the God Realm chased after them. The Ming Wadao sword circled around his body, full of killing intent. There was only a wall between the inside and outside of the city. It was the boundary between life and death. Outside the city, the Almighty from the God realm tried to enter the city. Just as he took half a step, the power around him was immediately suppressed. The Ming Wadao sword quickly dimmed and showed signs of dissipating. In the city, Ning Chen looked at the Almighty from the God realm in front of him and squinted his eyes. "Come in." Outside the city, the Almighty from the God realm retracted his steps and hesitated. "Coward." Ning Chen did not hide his ridicule at all, and immediately supported the injured Yun Mani and left. Behind them, the Almighty from the God realm had an ugly expression, but he suppressed the anger in his heart and did not enter rashly. On the east side of the city, Ning Chen returned with Yun Mani. When he saw the mess in front of him, the corner of his mouth twitched. "Where's my house?" Earthquake, it collapsed. In front of the collapsed ruins, the young man in green and the teacher, who was also homeless, answered. In front of them, in the only blacksmith shop that was spared from the disaster, the sound of metal clanking could be heard. It was time to close the shop, but the noise was still deafening. "It's on purpose." The young man in green looked at the blacksmith shop in front of him and gritted his teeth. "It's on purpose." The teacher said indifferently. "Where are you staying tonight?" Ning Chen asked the most important question. "Main Street." The young man in green said indifferently. The teacher chimed in. "Are you guys done talking?" At this time, the injured Yun Mani finally couldn't hold it in and shouted angrily. "Hey, Miss Yun, why are you injured? Do you need help?" The young man in green noticed the woman that Ning Chen was supporting and quickly went forward to greet her. "Get lost." Yun Mani resisted the urge to kick him and spat out a word. The young man in green retreated to the side, not daring to provoke her again. Ning Chen just remembered that there was an injured person beside him. He smiled embarrassedly and said, "I'll take Miss Yun back to rest first." The teacher was still a man of few words as he said lightly. The young man in green also shamelessly agreed. Ning Chen despised the former in his heart and immediately supported Yun Mani as they walked towards the small house in front. The newly built wooden house was simple and unique. It had survived the earthquake. Ning Chen helped Yun Mani into the house and brought her to the bed. "Miss Yun, have a good rest," Ning Chen said with a gentle expression. Yun Mani nodded. She was injured and didn't have the energy to say anything. After settling Miss Yun down, Ning Chen left the room without disturbing her rest. Outside, when the green-robed young man saw Zhang Xian walk out, he waved his hand. Ning Chen stepped forward and asked, "What is it? How did Miss Yun get hurt?" The young man in green asked with concern. "There's a powerful guy outside the city. We saw him killing people, so he wanted to kill us to silence us." Ning Chen replied, picking and choosing. "Powerful guy?" The green-clothed young man said in surprise, "How powerful? Do you need me to help? I can't do it alone, but there's still that old nerd." The teacher snorted coldly and did not reply. "He doesn't dare to enter the city. I don't know if he has left or not. Let's talk about it later," Ning Chen said indifferently. "That's true." The green-clothed young man nodded. After entering the city, everyone was the same. He was not afraid of anyone when it came to fighting. "That's not right." The green-clothed young man suddenly slapped his head and said, "If he's guarding outside the city, how can we go out of the city to cut trees? If we don't cut trees, how can we build houses?" "He doesn't know you," Ning Chen said indifferently. "That's right, he doesn't know me." The green-clothed young man heaved a sigh of relief. "Not necessarily." Ning Chen opened his mouth. "Miss Yun and I only saw him kill people, and then he chased after us. The city of Wei is only so big. If he wants to completely block the news, the best way is to kill everyone who leaves the city." The green-clothed young man heard this and his expression changed. It was really possible. Think of a way to kill him. The teacher said. It was rare for him to say more words. "Old nerd, I appreciate your words." The green-clothed young man laughed. Ning Chen touched his nose and said, "Actually, there's something I haven't said." "What is it?" The green-clothed young man was puzzled. The person outside the city seems to be cultivating something called the enlightened self-cutting Dao technique, Ningchen replied. Goodbye, pretend I didn't say anything. The green-clothed young man heard this and turned to leave. On the side, the teacher's face darkened and he didn't say a word. Don't go. Ningchen went forward to block the green-clothed young man and said, Don't you want to build your house? The green-clothed young man stopped and looked at the former as if he was an idiot. He said, Do you think I'm stupid? It's all right, Ningchen replied with uncertainty. Get lost. The green-clothed young man looked at the former with disdain and said, If I don't build my house, I can sleep on the streets. If I want to build my house, I might even lose my life. Do you think I'll make such a stupid choice? Isn't it just a guy who cultivates a forbidden technique? We have so many people working together and we can't beat him? Ningchen said in surprise. Do you know what the enlightened self-cutting Dao technique is? The green-clothed young man said angrily, You're working so hard to comprehend the Dao here. He only needs to wave his hand and he can destroy your 1,000 years of hard work. Fighting with such a person, isn't it courting death? Ningchen heard this and said helplessly, It sounds like there's really no way to fight. We can lure him into the city. On the side, the teacher suggested. Oh, what a good idea. The green-clothed young man said exaggeratedly, Do you think others are stupid? Who's going to lure him? I'm not going. It's a waste of effort. Clang, clang, clang. In the blacksmith's shop, the sound of iron striking was still rising and falling. It was so noisy that half the street could hear it clearly. This old blacksmith isn't done yet. The green-clothed young man gritted his teeth and shouted, Old blacksmith, are you going out of the city to chop trees? Not going. In the blacksmith's shop, a simple and honest voice sounded and directly refused. After living for so long, you've really become shrewd with age. The green-clothed young man said helplessly. This old blacksmith looked simple and honest, but he was actually harder to fool than anyone else. In the west, the sun set and the sky gradually darkened. Night came as promised. The cold wind blew and the three people standing outside couldn't help but shrink their bodies. It's really cold. The green-clothed young man looked at the collapsed house and said with nostalgia in his eyes. On the side, the teacher tightened his sleeves and stood there calmly. Ningchen also tightened his sleeves and didn't say a word. After a long time, the green-clothed young man gritted his teeth and said, Think of a way to kill him. Agreed. The teacher replied. Ningchen nodded and stretched out his hand. Clap your hands and swear to kill him. Under the pressure of hunger and cold, the three of them finally made up their minds and clapped their hands to swear to face the difficulties together. The three of them spent the long night in hardship. The cold wind blew on their bodies and it was bone-chilling. In the east, when the morning sun shone, the three of them sighed in relief at the same time and moved their frozen bodies. The three of them turned and walked out of the city together. Outside the city gate, the three of them stopped. How do we fight? The green-clothed young man asked. Don't let the Ming Wadao sword get close to you. As for the rest, we'll play it by ear. The teacher replied. That makes sense. The green-clothed young man nodded. That thing is very fast. Ningchen reminded. We're not slow either. The green-clothed young man replied. If we can't win, we'll return to the city. The teacher added. After the effective battle strategy, the three of them walked out of the city. Facing a strong enemy, they were vigilant. Outside the city, there was no one and it was unusually quiet. Left? The green-clothed young man was surprised. I don't know. The teacher replied. The green-clothed young man released his divine sense and searched for a long time, but he didn't find anything. He should have left. That gave me a fright. The green-clothed young man said unhappily. Let's go and chop some trees. The teacher nodded. Ningchen didn't object and walked towards the forest in front of them. Just when the three of them were 100 steps away from the small city, a small silver sword pierced through the air and slashed at the three of them. I knew that you old turtle didn't leave. The green-clothed young man said coldly and his figure flashed, dodging the Ming Wadao sword. The three of them separated and attacked the God Realm powerhouse together at an extremely fast speed. In the middle of the three, the God Realm powerhouse in a blue robe snorted. His divine power rose and a terrifying aura swept out. Amidst the surging waves of divine power, the Ming Wadao sword flickered and slashed at the three of them at an even faster speed. The three of them dodged the Ming Wadao sword. In front of them, the teacher's aura of righteousness exploded as he rushed towards the God Realm powerhouse in front of him. The teacher, who usually looked the most elegant and calm, was unexpectedly violent and ruthless when he fought. His every move was abnormally violent. With a rumble, the teacher's fist broke through the void and smashed towards the opponent in front of him. The God Realm powerhouse frowned and raised his left hand to block the attack. On the other side, a waterfall appeared around the green-clothed young man. The waterfall turned into silk and swept forward. The silk was thinner than hair but sharper than a blade. Wherever it passed, flying rocks were shattered. It was unstoppable. Behind him, Ning Chen held his sword and attacked from the most shameless angle. He directly attacked the back of the green-clothed young man. Trying to break a rock with an egg. The God Realm powerhouse's eyes flashed coldly. He flipped his palms and a violent divine power rushed out. Amidst the shocking vibrations, the attacks of the three of them were immediately disintegrated. The absolute suppression of cultivation was unstoppable. In the next moment, the Ming Wadao sword slashed across. In an instant, the clothes in front of the three of them were torn apart. Tough one retreat. In just one round of attack and defense, the winner was decided. The green-clothed young man shouted and immediately retreated. Not far away, the teacher had already retreated. His speed was so fast that it was shocking. On the opposite side, Ning Chen's figure disappeared from the battlefield and fled towards the small city. Damn you! The green-clothed young man was furious. He turned around and ran. In the small city, the three of them rushed in pathetically. Behind them, the Ming Wadao sword pierced through the air. Outside the city, the God Realm powerhouse's face was unusually gloomy. The three of them were ordinary, but they were good at escaping. Chapter 1363. In the city of Wei, the three people who fled into the city panted heavily. They were drenched in cold sweat and were terrified. We can't beat him. The young man in green straightened his body and wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. Indeed, I can't defeat him. The teacher chimed in. Ning Chen spread his hands, indicating that there was nothing he could do. His Mingwo Dao sword is too powerful. If we don't have a way to restrain it, we'll be sitting ducks. The young man in green said angrily. It's fast and untouchable. How can we restrain it? The teacher said lightly. The young man in green looked at Jiming and said suspiciously, You seem to have disappeared just now. You're very fast. I'm not going. Ning Chen saw through his intention and immediately denied it. Luring the enemy? He was not stupid. Do you have any sense of cooperation? The old bookworm and I are helping you solve your problem now. The young man in green said indignantly. I'm not going either. Ning Chen said without hesitation. The young man in green was so angry that he wanted to hit him. In the face of a powerful enemy, he forced himself to hold back and said, Think again. What else can we do? Do you have any Dharma treasures that can block the Mingwo Dao sword? Ning Chen asked. The teacher answered first. Then, the two of them looked at the young man in green. Why are you looking at me? The young man in green said angrily, That's the Mingwo Dao sword, not a piece of scrap metal. Where would I get a Dharma treasure to block it? Don't you have an umbrella? You can try it. The teacher exposed him and said calmly. Get lost. The young man in green refused directly and said, That's my life-saving Dharma treasure. What if it's broken? Ning Chen looked at the two of them and glanced back and forth. His eyes were full of suspicion. The young man in green was scared and said, What are you looking at? The teacher took half a step back silently and drew a clear line between the two. Both of you are my seniors. You've lived for thousands of years. You shouldn't be so weak. Ning Chen openly provoked them and mocked them. The young man in green and the teacher's expressions changed again and again. It was the first time in thousands of years that they were called weak by a junior. The two of them looked at each other and felt that they couldn't be so cowardly anymore. You use the umbrella and I'll use the Confucian golden scroll. The teacher said. All right. The green-robed young man made up his mind and replied, however, we have to go back and look for it. Me too, the teacher replied. Since the decision had been made, the two of them did not delay any longer and headed toward the east of the city. Ningchen followed behind with a puzzled expression, not knowing what the two of them were up to. In the east of the city, in front of a collapsed house, the young man in green and the teacher walked over. Looking at the ruins in front of them, they felt a headache coming on. The woman walked out of the blacksmith shop. She looked at Ningchen and asked, "Did you win?" Ningchen shook his head. "None of the three of you can win?" The woman asked in surprise. "The opponent is too strong," Ningchen said helplessly. "What are they doing?" The woman asked in confusion as she looked at the two people in front of the ruins who were constantly moving bricks and tiles. "He should be looking for something," Ningchen replied. In the blacksmith shop, Blacksmith Li curiously put down his hammer and walked out. After digging for a long time, the young man in green suddenly laughed and pulled out a broken umbrella from a pile of broken wood and tiles. "Found it." The broken green umbrella even had a wormhole on it. The young man in green was excited as if he had found a treasure. "I found it too. Let's go." At this moment, the teacher on the opposite side pulled out an ancient scroll from a pile of buried scrolls and said, "Don't worry about it." In front of the blacksmith shop, Blacksmith Li saw the things in the two people's hands. His honest face revealed a strange expression. Are they serious? After finding the treasure, the three of them left again and walked out of the city. In front of the city, the blue-robed divinity realm expert still did not leave. 100 steps away, a person blocked the entrance. No one dared to come out. In the city, the three of them walked out. Looking at the figure in front of them, they felt a little scared. "Why don't we discuss how to fight?" The young man in green stopped and whispered. "That makes sense." The teacher continued to chime in. Ningchen stopped and turned to look at the two of them. His face was full of disdain. "What's there to discuss after discussing all the way? Seniors, don't tell me you don't dare to go out." "Who said so? Let's fight." After being provoked again, the young man in green immediately walked out of the city. Behind him, the teacher caught up with him, and his expression began to look wary. The three of them left the city. 100 steps away from the city, the blue-robed divinity's face flashed with a mocking look. This time, he was not in a hurry to attack. "Have you found a way to deal with me?" The blue-robed divinity looked at the three of them and snorted. He flipped his right hand and the Ming Wadao sword appeared. The Ming Wadao sword that could cut through the Tao realm appeared again. The three of them looked serious and did not dare to be careless. "This time, I won't let you escape." As soon as he finished speaking, a tiger roared in the sky above the blue-robed divinity. A huge divinity tiger appeared. The Tao realm phenomenon was shocking. As the divinity tiger appeared, the sky quickly darkened. In the battle, a strong pressure descended and blocked all escape routes. "Not good." The young man in green's face darkened. Water flowed around him and turned into silk to resist the pressure coming from all directions. Sky slash. Ningchen held his sword and slashed. A majestic sword chi rushed into the sky and slashed at the divinity tiger. However, the sword chi pierced through the divinity tiger's body. The Tao realm phenomenon was not affected by any force. The Tao realm is not a physical object. It is the reflection of the cultivator's Tao heart. Nothing can hurt it. It can only be resisted by the Tao realm, the young man in green reminded him. Ningchen's eyes narrowed. He had really learned something. Be careful. You can't hurt his Tao realm phenomenon, but his Tao realm phenomenon can hurt you. Don't be careless, the teacher on the other side reminded him. What an unfair battle. Ningchen collected his thoughts and looked at the opponent in front of him. The Ming Wadao sword was already troublesome enough. Now, there was another Tao realm phenomenon. With a high cultivation, he could bully others as he wished. In the sky, the divinity tiger roared and rushed down. Boom! Below, the divinity tiger stepped on the plains and dust flew. After hearing the conversation of the three of them, he immediately targeted Ning Qin. Picking on the soft persimmon was the most effective method, no matter the time. In the violent sand waves, a figure in plain clothes flew out and stabilized himself 100 feet away. In the battle, the young man in green and the teacher looked at each other and were slightly relieved. Although this young man's cultivation was not high, his speed was really shocking. It should be enough to protect himself for a while. 100 feet away, Ning Qin flipped his palm. Instantly, the ground shook and sand gathered, turning into giant dragons that rushed toward the blue-robed man. The blue-robed man frowned as he had never seen such a strange ability. The divine power around him rose and blocked the incoming attack. The rumbling continued as the giant dragons attacked the divine power barrier. The entire Weiqing city started to shake again. "Old bookworm, what kind of secret technique is this?" the young man in green asked in surprise. "I don't know." "Don't ask. Let's fight first." After saying that, the teacher moved. Righteous energy surged and was extremely violent. "What an impatient person," the young man in green said helplessly. He also flew out and joined forces to attack the enemy. The two experts who were close to the God-fiend level joined forces and pressed down on the blue-robed man in front of them. "You don't know what's good for you." The blue-robed man snorted. The Mingwo Dao sword in his hand flew out and slashed at the two. The teacher and the young man in green took out their trump cards. The Confucian sect golden scroll and the broken green umbrella blocked the Taoist sword. Boom! The Taoist sword collided with the Dharma artifact. The two felt a sharp pain in their divine senses. The Mingwo Dao sword actually penetrated the Dharma artifact and tried to slash their divine senses. At this moment of crisis, phoenix flames rose in the battle. The white-robed figure instantly appeared and grabbed the two before escaping again. "You can't escape." The blue-robed man's eyes flashed coldly. He raised his hand and pressed down. The divine tiger roared and swallowed the three in front of him. Killing intent appeared again. The broken green umbrella in the hands of the young man in green spun rapidly and blocked the divine tiger's attack. "Old bookworm, it's your turn." The two forces collided. The young man in green's mouth turned red as he shouted. The teacher nodded. The Confucian sect golden scroll opened. Golden words appeared in the sky and turned into 4 sacred walls to trap the divine tiger. Roar! The divine tiger roared and charged at the sacred walls. The sacred artifact of the Confucian sect showed signs of collapse. The phenomenon of the Tao realm was unstoppable. Even the sacred artifact of the Confucian sect could not last for long. At this moment, the white tiger slaughter divine artifact appeared in Ning Chen's hand. The 7 strings moved at the same time, and the sound of destruction could destroy the world. Chapter 1364. Outside the city of Wei, 3 experts who had been oppressed by the deity world rose up to fight back. The 3 of them worked together, using their Dharma treasures and ultimate moves to seal the Tao realm phenomenon. In an instant, Ning Qin took out the Yama divine zither. The 7 strings moved the world, and a powerful sound came out. The horrifying power and earth-shattering sound waves spread out. The blue-robed expert felt a sharp pain in his divine sense. His mind was distracted, and the Mingwo Dao sword was temporarily restrained. "Well done." Seeing this, the young man in green drew water into threads. Threads of water spread out and killed the expert in front of him. As the killing intent approached, the blue-robed expert's expression sank. He endured the pain in his divine sense and used his divine power to block the incoming attacks. However, there were thousands of threads and they penetrated everywhere. The threads were like sharp blades that broke through the expert's defense where the divine power was weak, bringing out a waterfall of dazzling blood. With a groan, the blue-robed expert's body turned red. He was injured for the first time since the battle started. The attack was effective. The teacher's figure followed closely behind. Golden words surrounded his body, and he punched out with earth-shattering power. The extremely violent attack was the complete opposite of the teacher's gentle appearance. The Confucian golden scroll showed its power, and golden words flew out to support the attack. Boom! Boom! An intense impact rang out as the fist landed on the blue-robed almighty being's body. Divine energy protected his body as he blocked the incoming attack. Wave after wave of attacks shook the air. The blue-robed expert was forced back, and his aura showed signs of instability. After being injured continuously, it was difficult for him to use his divine power. In the blink of an eye, a white-robed figure flashed across the battlefield at an extreme speed. It was so fast that it was hard to see with the naked eye. In Ning Chen's hand, it was like a divine sword that gathered the sharpness of heaven and earth. It directly broke through the divine power barrier and pierced into the blue-robed expert's chest. Ugh! With a groan, the blue-robed expert was forced back several steps. Blood splashed out from the corner of his mouth. He was injured again. Kill him! The young man in green's eyes lit up. He condensed water into threads, and they wrapped around the expert in front of him. In the next moment, the blue-robed expert's body was bound by the water threads. Ha! After a few steps, the teacher shouted and flew out. He used the Confucian Golden Scroll as a heavy weapon and directly smashed the blue-robed expert's head. The extremely violent way of fighting made the eyelids of Knowing Destiny and the young man in green twitch. Bang! The Confucian sect's Golden Scroll and the Supreme Elder's head collided, creating a deafening explosion. The blue-robed Supreme Elder's forehead split open and blood gushed out. His head was injured, and his divine sense was in extreme pain. In the battle, the Tao realm phenomenon collapsed and vanished. However, at this moment, a silver sword radiance pierced through the air from behind the three of them and slashed toward Knowing Destiny. Be careful! The young man's expression changed when he saw the sword light. He shouted loudly. The Tao-severing sword was unstoppable. At the moment of life and death, Ning Chen made a prompt decision. His figure suddenly turned illusory. The Phoenix secret technique was a forbidden technique that could control time and space. The Ming Wadao sword passed through his body as if it was passing through an illusion. An instant later, Ning Chen's figure appeared and solidified again. However, he staggered and vomited a mouthful of blood. The Phoenix secret technique, which had always been successful, was unable to completely block the Mingwo Dao sword's attack this time. Ning Chen was injured, and the aura around him shook violently. Guard your mind. Don't let your Dao heart fall. The young man in green took a step forward and shouted in a deep voice. Ning Chen closed his eyes and focused on guarding his mind, not allowing the remaining sword power of the Ming Wadao sword to take advantage of him. The situation of the battle changed. The blue-robed mighty figure saw an opportunity and roared angrily, counterattacking forcefully. Violent divine power surged. In the battle, the three of them immediately fell into a sea of divine power and found it difficult to move. In the void, the Ming Wadao sword's radiance shone brightly and slashed toward the three below. Oh no! The three of them wanted to block the sudden counterattack, but they were already powerless. Let's fight. The young man in green made up his mind. His eyes shone brightly. In the sky, a blood-colored camellia bloomed. The Tao realm phenomenon appeared for the first time. Tao realm? You're courting death. The blue-robed mighty figure smiled angrily. The Ming Wadao sword pierced through the sky and slashed toward the blood-colored camellia. Shameless old man, are you tired of living? The teacher was shocked and shouted. Using the Tao realm in front of the Ming Wadao sword was equivalent to courting death. I won't die. The young man in green replied. He looked at the Tao sword in the sky and was extremely focused. The moment the Tao sword approached, the young man in green closed his eyes and retracted his Tao realm. In the void, the blood-colored camellia instantly disappeared. The Tao sword slashed across, and in that split second, life and death were decided. Now, hurry up! The young man in green shouted as he saw the opportunity to fight with his life on the line. The teacher retracted his mind, and righteous energy rose again. He slapped the Confucian sect's golden scroll. With a loud rumble, the Confucian sect's golden scroll covered the blue-robed mighty figure's head again. The loud sound was earth-shattering, and a waterfall of blood splattered. All of you deserve to die. The blue-robed mighty figure's face was covered in blood. His expression was abnormally ferocious, and his divine energy went berserk as he slammed his palm toward the former. The teacher raised his arms and gathered righteous energy to block the incoming attack. Blood splattered all over the sky. The heavy palm strike sent the teacher flying dozens of feet away. He staggered and stabilized himself. It was a tragic battle. The blue-robed mighty figure, who had a shocking cultivation base, was still able to withstand the heavy blows. It was shocking. At this moment, Ning Chen, who was focused on suppressing the injuries of the illuminating self-Tao sword, opened his eyes. He drew his sword and moved. His sword was as fast as lightning. In the blink of an eye, his sword pierced the blue-robed mighty figure's chest again. "Get lost!" The blue-robed mighty figure roared. He endured his injuries and counterattacked with a palm. When the palm struck, Ning Chen withdrew his sword and retreated hundreds of feet away. In the blood-soaked battle, all four of them had suffered heavy injuries. Whoever could not hold on first would be the one to die and vanish. "He's still not dead. Monster." The young man in green looked at the crack between the blue-robed mighty figure's eyebrows and said with a heavy expression, "An expert of this level won't die so easily." The teacher suppressed the injuries in his body and maintained a calm expression as he replied, "Try harder. After you finish him, I'll treat you to a drink." Not far away, Ning Chen waved his sword to disperse the blood on it. He looked forward and said, "I want the god's nectar from the drunken wind pavilion that's 100,000 miles away," the young man in green replied. "Sure." Ning Chen replied. "2 jars, the teacher said indifferently. "As long as you finish him, 10 jars will do." Ning Chen replied and dashed out to start the battle again. Illuminating self-Tao sword, slay immortals and destroy demons. The blue-robed mighty figure was facing a life-and-death crisis that he hadn't faced in 100 years. He roared and gathered his divine power. In an instant, the small silver sword in the void shone brightly and enveloped the entire battle. "It's this stupid sword again." The young man in green looked gloomy. He opened the green umbrella in his hand and blocked the silver brilliance. "I'll lure the enemy. You guys find a chance to give him a fatal blow." Ning Chen transmitted his voice and slashed at the enemy in front of him like lightning. The blue-robed mighty figure's expression turned serious. He controlled the illuminating self-Tao sword to kill the opponent in front of him. In a battle of speed, Ning Chen used all his movement techniques. His figure was shockingly fast. However, the illuminating self-Tao sword wasn't slow either. It followed closely behind. The unstoppable sword could only be dodged. In the battle, one afterimage after another was slashed by the illuminating self-Tao sword. It was dangerous. "Old nerd, don't hide anymore. Show me what you're capable of." The young man in green looked at Ning Chen, who was fighting hard in front of him. He pointed at the sky, and water splashed everywhere. Not far away, the teacher also calmed down. He took a step forward and formed a seal to kill. In an instant, the Confucian golden scroll expanded rapidly and turned into a huge book. Golden words flew out and circled around the divine dynasty's imperial preceptor. When the two powerhouses joined forces, their power was earth-shattering. The blue-robed mighty figure didn't dare to be careless. His divine essence surged and turned into 2 ferocious beasts. When the 2 powers collided, the sky fell and the earth fell. The aftermath roared and surged. The 3 of them retreated a few steps at the same time, their bodies dyed red. The tragic battle finally came to an end. Ning Chen took a step forward and pierced his body with a sword. Blood spurted out, and the blue-robed mighty figure's face was ferocious. He counterattacked with a palm. 8 dragons appeared in front of Ning Chen, but they couldn't block the former's palm. The dragons dissipated, and the aftermath hit him. 100 steps away, Ning Chen stopped and vomited blood again. "You can't kill me." The blue-robed mighty figure was almost crazy. The last of his divine essence surged out and swallowed the 3 of them. At this moment, a bare-chested figure flashed past the battle. He held a hammer and smashed it on the blue-robed mighty figure's head. The blue-robed mighty figure's smile froze. He couldn't believe what he saw. In front of him, Blacksmith Lee held a hammer in his hand and smiled. His white teeth were creepy. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.